Lord of Mysteries, the Fool Brother is a Witch. By Tuozhang de Yizhe. Chapter 126-150. Chapter 126, The Hope of the City of Silver. The tall man looked up, his expression dim, barely maintaining his dignity but still unable to hide his helplessness and resignation. He looked at his wife, thought of his son, and placed a hand over hers, patting it gently twice to comfort her. "Do you think the elders know?" the man asked. The woman lowered her head and did not answer. They both knew the answer. The injuries of Derek's parents, which even the best doctors in the City of Silver could not heal and were practically a death sentence, had rapidly recovered within a few days. It was impossible for the elders not to see the problem. Even if the elders hadn't approached them yet, they knew that Derek had definitely entered their sights. Since the elders haven't objected, it means things haven't reached an uncontrollable point. The man comforted his wife, and himself. Perhaps, it truly is the hope of the City of Silver. They were silent, neither knowing what the existence behind Derek would bring to the City of Silver, hope, or deeper despair. After a long while, the man said with a resolute tone, "When Derek returns, I will go to the elders and tell them about this. This is a major matter concerning the City of Silver, and they must be informed." The woman looked at her husband, her lips pressed tightly, and nodded heavily. Lightning flashed incessantly in the darkness, illuminating the City of Silver with its pale light. Derek walked alone through the city, feeling dejected. He had already been examined by a psychoanalyst and found to have no abnormalities. In reality, even if there were abnormalities, a psychoanalyst wouldn't be able to detect them. Derek and his parents understood that doing so was merely for their own psychological comfort. Mr. Fool, Derek felt a bit lost. The City of Silver had not received a response from a deity for far too long. He lowered his head, walked through the cold streets of the City of Silver, and quickly returned home. "Father, Mother." Derek pulled open the door and closed it behind him. In the small, dim room, his father and mother were waiting for him. Derek. His tall father stood up, leaning on the table, and walked step by step to Derek's front. "Were there any abnormalities?" "No." Derek shook his head, "No abnormalities." That's good, the man said, patting Derek's shoulder with a heavy, firm hand. "You two wait for me here, I have something to go out for." Derek paused, then understood. During this time, to conceal Derek's situation from others, Derek's parents had not left the house, and the neighbors did not know that the Berg couple had recovered. However, the elders of the City of Silver paid close attention to residents on the brink of death, and Derek and his family had no intention of hiding it from the elders, so the elders were aware of the matter. When facing the elders and deciding whether to conceal the truth, the Berg couple were extremely nervous and conflicted. On one side was their son, and on the other was the City of Silver, but in the end, they still chose the City of Silver. Fortunately, the elders did not forcibly take Derek away. Regardless of what the elders thought, for the Berg couple, their son's current safety was enough to make them weep with joy. "Father," Derek tugged at his father's clothes, looking up at him. "Let me go. Do you know what to do?" As a father, he knew his son very well. Derek would not lie. Derek paused, his hand gripping the clothes gradually loosening. The flickering candlelight swayed slightly, casting a dim, warm glow on one side of the boy's body, leaving part of him in shadow. "Next time, you go." The man looked at his son with bright eyes. After speaking, he turned and left. Taylor Berg looked up at the lightning in the sky, blinking uncomfortably. Taylor. The Berg family's neighbor saw Taylor Berg, whom she hadn't seen in a long time, and was extremely surprised. "Your injuries, have they healed?" Taylor coughed twice, his face pale, and said weakly, "I can barely live a normal life, but just being alive is a miracle." "How is Lucy?" Laura asked with concern. "Not so good," Taylor said with a hint of relief and helplessness, "but thankfully, she is also out of danger." "Oh, my goodness, congratulations, this is simply a divine blessing." Laura was extremely surprised and happily prayed for the Berg couple. "Yes, this is simply a divine blessing. How did you recover?" Laura asked curiously. Taylor could sense that the old woman meant no harm. We have to thank the doctors of the City of Silver, Taylor coughed twice. Although it's hard to fully recover, at least we survived, didn't we? Yes, Laura curled her lips, genuinely happy for the Berg couple. As long as you can survive, it's already very good, you are a group of lucky children. Taylor looked at the happy woman and said, I have some important matters now. Goodbye, Ms. Laura. Oh, all right, goodbye, lucky one. Laura smiled, the wrinkles on her face making her appear unusually kind. After bidding farewell to Ms. Laura, Taylor walked towards the City of Silver Twin Towers, his steps slow and unsteady, seemingly genuinely weak. At the front of the Twin Tower dome, Taylor Berg stopped. Taylor. A strange voice suddenly came from behind. Taylor turned around and saw a tall, bald middle-aged man with a dark green symbol tattooed on his head. Taylor's gaze swept over the man's head, lingering on the dark green symbol for 2 seconds before he tentatively asked, Elder Waiter. Waiter Hillman nodded and asked, Is something the matter? Yes, Taylor immediately replied, without any hesitation, something very important. Is that so? Elder Waiter turned around, signaling Taylor to follow him. Taylor immediately followed the elder, entering the Twin Towers, passing through corridors, and arriving at a room. Elder Waiter closed the door and nodded slightly, You can speak now. Seeing the elder's reaction, Taylor knew his guess was correct, the elders had already noticed Derek's situation. The man took a deep breath internally, organized his words, and said, Today, Derek went to his room to rest, slept for a short while, and after he came out, he suddenly told us that the hope of the City of Silver lies in the giant court. Waiter's body stiffened, and he looked up, staring intently at Taylor. Taylor continued, I don't know the specifics, this seems to have just been a dream of Derek's. Was there anything unusual after Derek returned to his room? Waiter asked. What did he do in the room? I don't know much. Derek showed no abnormalities, we've already had him examined by a psychoanalyst. He went to his room to sleep, but he slept more deeply than before. We called him twice but couldn't wake him. Strictly speaking, Taylor hadn't lied, he truly didn't know, merely adding some subjective judgments that were favorable to Derek. Waiter was silent for a few seconds, seemingly thinking about something. After a long while, he finally said, I understand. Chapter 127, Action begins. Tingen Technical School. Led by the crisp and pleasant sound of the dismissal bell, noisy sounds echoed throughout the campus. Melissa leaned slightly to her right, blinked, and looked at her friend beside her, asking, Elizabeth, have you ever submitted a commission to a security company? Elizabeth turned her head, looked at Melissa, and shook her head, No, but I know a little bit about it, just a little. Has something happened at your house? No. Melissa shook her head, not explaining the specific reason. Elizabeth didn't press further. Many students in this school might lose everything they have and become the poorest of the poor, and many students facing expulsion are unwilling to tell others the reason. The girl looked at Melissa with encouraging eyes and comforted her, It's okay, Melissa. You have 2 excellent, gentlemanly older brothers, and both of your older brothers have considerable incomes. Even if one loses his job, it won't affect you at all. No, your pocket money might be a little less, but that's all. Do you understand, Melissa? Melissa was startled, then realized her friend had misunderstood, and immediately explained, Nothing has really happened. I just, have some things that are inconvenient to talk about. Elizabeth paused, thought for 2 seconds with her head down, then understood, and said with a smile, I see, Melissa. Girls your age always have little secrets. No, Elizabeth, Melissa retorted, everyone has their own secrets. If your next sentence is still like that, then I'll go find someone else. Elizabeth looked at Melissa's serious expression, pinched her 2 fingers together, placed them in front of her lips, and made a zipping motion, indicating that she would not continue the topic. The young girl leaned slightly towards Elizabeth, her serious demeanor making one suspect she would pull out a notebook and write down everything Elizabeth said the next second. Melissa naturally wouldn't go to investigate without any knowledge. She wanted to inquire about the price of commissioning a security company as soon as possible, and to make Klein relax his guard, she chose her classmate instead of Klein. She listened to her friend's knowledge with a serious expression, jotting it down bit by bit. The price for security company commissions is really very high. Although the security company's commission income depends on the price offered by the client, if the price is too low, the security company will not accept the commission. If it's an unknown small company, there might be room for bargaining, and it might be lower. The Blackthorn Security Company, where Klein works, is not well known, but it can cooperate with the authorities, which made Melissa very worried about whether they would accept her bargaining. The price also varies depending on the specific commission. The lower-priced services are for finding lost items, such as inanimate objects or pets. If specific clues in a search area can be provided, the commission fee might be reduced. However, these matters are usually handled by private detectives, who charge lower prices, and some security companies will not accept such commissions. Finding a pet. Melissa immediately thought of Rui Rui. Teacher Eve had complained to her that Rui Rui always stayed out overnight and hadn't returned for 2 days, but the teacher wasn't worried. According to her, this was Rui Rui's usual behavior, and Rui Rui could find its way home. She could use Rui Rui as an excuse to issue a commission. The commission was basically decided, next was to figure out how to find the anomaly. Melissa mentally rehearsed the conversation she would have after arriving at Klein's company, until school was dismissed. After school, Melissa ran to the bus stop and indeed saw a familiar figure by the roadside. Teacher Eve. Melissa quickened her pace by 2 steps, came to Eve's side, and panted a few times to regain her breath. After her breathing stabilized, the girl opened her mouth and said, "Teacher, I have some things, so I can't go home with you." "It's all right." Eve smiled gently, pulled a white handkerchief from her handbag, and wiped the girl's forehead. Melissa was startled, then said somewhat shyly, "Thank you, teacher." The girl said goodbye to Eve and hurried away from school. Although Melissa told Klein that she would go to Blackthorn Security Company on Sunday, in reality, to prevent Klein and his colleagues from conspiring to deceive her, Melissa planned to go on Monday. Monday was the second day after the incident, and Klein should not have had time to react. Moreover, today was his day off, so Klein would not be at Blackthorn Security Company. Melissa walked quickly on her way to Blackthorn Security Company, recalling and refining her lines. Meow. A cat's meow suddenly sounded. Melissa subconsciously looked towards the source of the sound, only to see a black mass, with a beige strip on it. Rui Rui. Melissa walked forward hesitantly, carefully using her hand to flip over the black mass, revealing the silver round tag on the beige collar. Rui Rui. Melissa tentatively called out. She had only seen Rui Rui a few times, and in the girl's memory, Rui Rui had never worn such a collar. She had only seen Rui Rui wear 2 kinds of collars. One was a red string threaded with a strange lock, and the other was very similar to the collar the black cat was wearing but without the silver round tag. Meow. The black cat responded softly, lowered its head, rubbed against Melissa's hand, and purred. Rui Rui. Meow. It really is Rui Rui. The girl's eyes lit up, and she silently said in her heart, "Praise the goddess." Melissa picked up the black cat, stroked it soothingly twice, turned around, and wanted to send it back to the teacher's home. 1 step, 2 steps, 3 steps. The young girl's speed became slower and slower, until finally, she gradually stopped. Melissa tilted her head, feeling the soft cat fur gently pressing against her cheek, bringing a soft, comfortable sensation. If she went back now, it would be too late. Melissa now stayed at the teacher's house for a while after school, going home later but still before dark. To save on commission fees, she couldn't take a public carriage, and going back and forth would waste a lot of time, not to mention she had already spent a lot of time walking from school to here. Melissa lowered her head to look at the black cat in her arms, her eyes flickering with thought. A few seconds later, the young girl ran back to her original spot, hiding the black cat in the bushes. The girl's fair fingers slid over the silver round tag, the cool touch making her notice this unusually conspicuous accessory on the black cat. Melissa pressed Rui's head down with 2 fingers together, making her expose her entire nape to her gaze. The young girl's fingers pressed on the beige cotton collar, rubbing it around but finding that the collar had no zippers, buttons, or strings for removal. She withdrew her fingers, frowning at the collar around the black cat's neck. Was it just slipped on? The girl tried to pinch the collar with her fingers and gently pulled it outwards, and the collar began to show its good elasticity. Melissa extended her other hand, pulled the collar, and took it off Rui. She casually put the collar into her pocket. This way, it wouldn't be easily found, which could buy some more time, and there were also specific clues, which could save some commission fees. Melissa stroked Rui's head with satisfaction and said, Rui, you must stay here until someone from the security company or I, Teacher Eve, or other people you know take you away, do you understand? Meow. Melissa patted Rui's head again, then gently picked up the black cat's tail, which was sticking out of the bushes, and placed it at Rui's feet. Very good. The girl stood up, silently cheering herself on, patted her skirt, and headed towards Blackthorn Security Company. Melissa walked quickly along the street, turning a corner. As her vision shifted, a familiar place appeared before her. On both sides of the road were many bright and clean shops, with colorful buildings displaying a vitality and flamboyance quite different from the people of this country. Harold's Department Store, Veterans Club, Sear Club. The girl stared in shock at the familiar scene before her, a scene that shouldn't be there, unable to recover for a long time. How is this possible? Why did I come to Orr Street District? Melissa had lived in Tingen City for more than 10 years. Although she hadn't memorized all the roads and layouts of Tingen City, she knew that her current location was very far from Orr Street District, and it was impossible to reach it just by turning a corner. Orr Street District was livelier than other districts. No one noticed the suddenly appearing girl, or rather, no one knew that the girl standing in the district had suddenly appeared in Orr Street District. In the bustling district, she only felt cold. The girl stared blankly at everything before her, as if losing the ability to think for a moment. A chill filled the girl's entire body, her hairs stood on end, and a sense of eeriness and unease tightly coiled around her heart like a venomous snake flicking its tongue. Melissa felt as if her body was no longer under her control. She wanted to lift her feet and run back, but both her mind and body became slow and stiff under the fear. Whether it was an illusion or not, she always felt like someone was watching her, but she didn't dare to look back. Calm down, Melissa. Melissa continuously comforted herself in her heart, gradually regaining control of her body. Without any hesitation, she immediately turned around, ran back, held onto the wall, and rounded the corner. What met her eyes was an unfamiliar place. Melissa looked up, observing her surroundings, feeling both strange and somewhat familiar. It seems like the North District. At least it's still in Tingen. Melissa smiled bitterly, comforting herself in her heart. The girl turned her head, looking at her hand resting on the wall, her flickering gaze revealing an undeniable unease. Huff, huff, huff. Melissa took several deep breaths, trying to suppress the fear in her heart. She had encountered an incomprehensible, strange, and eerie power. Melissa gritted her teeth, constantly encouraging herself. Klein and Benson are still waiting for me to come home. Wait, Klein. A true seer. Suddenly, Melissa felt as if she understood something. If Klein had this strange power, could he help me? But what if Klein got into danger because of me? Currently, the only Beander power Klein has shown is divination, and it's still unknown if Klein's divination comes from a mysterious power. Melissa pursed her lips, looking towards that corner. No matter what, it's better to try and solve it myself first. If she came back too late, Klein and Benson would come looking for her, and she didn't want to drag Klein and Benson into such danger. Danger? If Klein really possessed such power, was he also hiding a secret with the same thought? Melissa lowered her eyes, reined in her extraneous thoughts, and seriously considered how to resolve the current situation. She withdrew her hand and looked at that corner. This corner, it should have been fine before. After all, she always took normal, busy roads. If there was a problem, it would have become an urban legend long ago. Did something go wrong when I crossed it? But I crossed it twice, and both times I ended up somewhere else. I wonder if there's any pattern to where it teleports me. Melissa took 2 steps back, away from the corner, and turned to look for a public carriage stop. I wonder if this way I can leave, the girl thought as she moved away from the strange corner. Melissa was unfamiliar with this place. She walked aimlessly down the street, several times wanting to ask for help but ultimately giving up. She couldn't involve innocent people. The girl turned a corner, only to find herself already on Narcissus Street. Melissa's eyes widened in surprise, and she instinctively took 2 steps back. She stiffly turned her head, looking at that corner, and another corner. It's the corner. As long as I turn a corner, I'll be sent somewhere else, and the Beyonder power seems to be on me, not the corner. Melissa carefully recalled everything she had encountered today, finding no abnormalities. She pursed her lips and looked up in the direction of No. 2 Narcissus Street. After a moment of hesitation, she slowly lifted her feet and ran towards home. Klein might know something. The fast running made her breathing quicken, and gradually, Melissa felt some pain in her throat and lungs. She was very glad that this teleportation location was very close to No. 2 Narcissus Street and had no corners. Melissa gasped for breath, frantically fumbling for her keys in her pocket, unlocking the door, and then pushing it open. Klein was sitting on the sofa, reading Gentleman's Aesthetics, which Benson had recommended. Hearing the sound of the door opening, he looked up towards the doorway. Melissa. Klein looked at the panting Melissa in surprise, his face showing clear astonishment. Klein. Klein saw Melissa rushing towards him with a serious expression, but she disappeared before his eyes the moment she entered the door. Melissa. Klein immediately stood up in fright, throwing Gentleman's Aesthetics onto the sofa. Without even putting on his top hat, he picked up his cane and ran out. Has Miss Melissa returned? Bella heard Melissa's voice and came out of the kitchen, only to find the room empty. Klein, who had been sitting on the sofa reading, had also left, with only his book remaining. Bella felt a bit strange, but didn't think much of it. She closed Gentleman's Aesthetics on the sofa and placed it on the coffee table. Looking at the familiar yet strange place before her, a sense of powerlessness rose in Melissa's heart. Opening the door, no, crossing the door would also send her somewhere else. Now, she was back in the North District. Klein must be scared to death, Melissa thought to herself. Klein will definitely come looking for me. He can divine, so he should find me quickly. Melissa lowered her head and thought for 2 seconds, finally deciding to wait for Klein here. There was no other way, she had already involved Klein. Melissa sighed in her heart, and her mind replayed everything from today, summarizing her several teleports. This situation must be resolved, otherwise, even if she returned home, she wouldn't be able to live a normal life. The first time was in Orr Street District, the second time was in the North District, the third time was Narcissus Street, and the fourth time was again the North District. All in Tingen City. Is there a distance limit? Everything was normal before school ended, but after school, it wasn't normal. I need a more precise time point. Melissa carefully recalled everything she did after turning the last normal corner and before encountering the Beyonder incident. Walking, and also, Rui. Melissa pulled out the off-white collar with the silver medallion from her pocket, her fingers stroking the smooth, cool surface of the medallion, her eyes fixed on the mysterious symbol on the medallion that she had never seen before. Could it be that black cat wasn't Rui? Chapter 129, The Collar. Melissa lowered her head, her gaze fixed intently on the collar in her hands, her expression unreadable as her eyes flickered. She slowly clenched her hand, the silver plaque pressing bit by bit into her palm, leaving a faint mark. She looked up, took a deep breath, walked to a corner, bent her knees slightly, placed the collar on the ground, then closed her eyes and stepped around the corner. The moment she opened her eyes, the young girl immediately looked behind her. Still in the North District. She hadn't been teleported anywhere else. It really was related to that collar. Melissa quickly returned to her original spot, picked up the collar, and clutched it tightly. That black cat was definitely not an ordinary black cat. Could it be that she was cursed by it because she took its item without permission? This thought was immediately dismissed by Melissa, because the abnormal factor was on the collar, not on her. Melissa sighed in her heart, brought the collar to her eyes, and thought, troubled, how should I deal with this collar? She couldn't just throw it away anywhere, it would be terrible if someone else picked it up. And if the black cat knew she threw its collar away, it might retaliate against her and her family. But if she didn't throw it away, she couldn't move around normally. Melissa gripped the collar tightly, warming the cold silver plaque slightly. After a long while, she slowly loosened her grip. I can't throw it away. I'll wait until Mr. Klein arrives and discuss it with him. Melissa frowned, sighed in her heart, looked left and right, and walked to a bench. She held up her skirt with both hands, just about to sit down, but suddenly remembered that she had been teleported to the North District when she crossed the door on her way home, and immediately stood up again. She still didn't know all the rules of the collar's teleportation, so it was better not to make any unnecessary movements. Melissa thought to herself, pressing her lips together, and returned to the roadside, standing by the street. Meow. A soft meow suddenly entered the young girl's ears. Melissa froze instantly, her body tensing, her head turning slowly and stiffly like a rusty machine. Her gaze moved bit by bit, drew closer bit by bit, and finally, a pair of brown eyes entered her field of vision. A black cat with honey brown eyes sat like a statue on the black, sloped roof of a shop. It seemed to merge with the roof. Melissa first only saw those beautiful eyes, and only after careful discernment did she see a cat emerge from the black. The young girl looked up, a hint of unease in her eyes, her body trembling slightly, yet her hands steadily held the collar up, suppressing her fear as she said, I'm sorry for taking your collar without your permission. Melissa's strange behavior attracted the attention of passers-by, and their frequent glances made her very uncomfortable. The girl didn't want to attract attention because of a Beander event, she only wanted to live a normal and stable life with Benson and Mr. Klein. Melissa raised the collar in her hand, lowered her head, and at the same time tilted her head slightly to the right, trying to shield the lower half of her face with her arm. The moment she lowered her head, the girl realized this would block her vision, leaving the black cat out of her sight. Without any hesitation, Melissa immediately looked up at the black cat on the roof. Meow. The black cat leapt from the building, transforming into a black lightning bolt, and rushed straight towards Melissa. Melissa was startled by the sudden turn of events. Before she could process why the black cat would suddenly attack her, her body instinctively took a step back, her eyes tightly shut, her arms covering her head, and her entire body curled up, crouching on the ground. Suddenly, she felt her arm being lightly pushed, and then a force came from her hand, trying to pull the collar from her grasp. That force vanished in an instant, followed by the empty feeling in her hand. The collar was taken. Melissa immediately thought. She tentatively opened her eyes, cautiously observing her surroundings. The black cat was gone. Miss, are you all right? Melissa's peculiar behavior had already caught the attention of some passers-by. Upon seeing the girl suddenly attacked by a black cat, a kind gentleman ran over to help her up. I'm fine, just startled, not hurt. Melissa smiled at the kind gentleman. Thank you very much, sir. No need to thank me, I didn't do anything worth thanking for. Melissa chatted with the people who gathered around for a while, omitting the Beander event and explaining her behavior. She explained the black cat is her friend's cat, and because her friend had given its favorite collar to Melissa, it had run out to snatch the collar back. After a while, the crowd dispersed. Melissa sat on the bench and, a few minutes later, saw a panting Mr. Klein hurrying over. Mr. Klein, who always valued his appearance, was neither wearing his coat nor his top hat, and his expensive, highly cherished white shirt also had noticeable wrinkles. Only a silver inlaid cane barely maintained the decorum of a gentleman. Melissa. Mr. Klein saw Melissa unharmed and immediately breathed a sigh of relief, quickly running over. Mr. Klein. Melissa immediately stood up and rushed towards Mr. Klein. Are you all right? Mr. Klein looked at Melissa anxiously, asking with a face full of concern, "Are you hurt?" "No." Melissa shook her head, her eyes scanning Mr. Klein up and down, her lips pressed together, and she said with a hint of guilt, "Let's go back first, we can talk when we get home." "All right." Mr. Klein nodded and took his sister to the public carriage station. People at the station saw the disheveled Mr. Klein and immediately moved away from him, gathering aside and whispering. Mr. Klein's excellent hearing allowed him to easily hear the conversations of the gentlemen and ladies in the station. "It's like they're avoiding a hooligan," Mr. Klein mumbled in his heart, feeling a bit awkward. Tingen in July and August was hot. It was understandable and perfectly reasonable for gentlemen to take off their coats at home, but it would be impolite to do so outside if not facing intimate acquaintances. Especially since Mr. Klein was not only without his coat but also without his top hat, and his white shirt was wrinkled. To conservative lowness, this was completely considered disheveled. He had been looked at this way on his way here, but at the time, he was entirely focused on Melissa's safety and didn't notice these things. Now that he realized it, he felt quite embarrassed. Melissa also evidently noticed the awkward situation and silently took 2 steps forward to stand in front of Mr. Klein, trying to shield her brother. Mr. Klein saw Melissa's action, a slight smile playing on his lips, and much of his embarrassment dissipated. He raised a hand and patted his sister's shoulder reassuringly. The two stood one in front of the other, waiting for the public carriage, and then rode it home. Bella showed some surprise when she saw Mr. Klein's appearance. "Mr. Klein, what happened to you?" "There was a sudden emergency at the company, and I had to rush back," Mr. Klein explained with a smile. "Melissa and I are going upstairs first. Call us when Benson gets back." "All right, Mr. Klein," Bella said respectfully. Chapter 137. Klein and Melissa went upstairs one after another, arriving at Klein's room. After Melissa entered the room, she locked the door from behind to prevent any accidents and from being discovered by others. There was only one chair in the room. Klein moved the wooden chair from his desk next to Melissa for her to sit on, while he sat on the bed. "Melissa," Klein said with a serious expression, "what did you encounter?" Melissa's expression was solemn. She organized her thoughts for a moment and then told Klein everything she had experienced and speculated. Klein pondered for 2 seconds, then reached into his shirt pocket and took out the citrine pendulum. As a seer, Klein naturally carried a pendulum with him at all times. Not only that, but to be safe, he also kept the ancient silver mirror his old sister gave him on his person at all times. Fortunately, that silver mirror was relatively small and easy to carry. Klein did not ask Melissa to leave and performed the divination in front of his younger sister. Melissa paused for 2 seconds when Klein took out the pendulum, then immediately realized that Klein was a true seer and guessed that he was divining the Beander incident she had encountered. She stared intently at the pendulum in Klein's hand, a hint of curiosity in her eyes. After experiencing such an event, the girl was both afraid and curious about Beander powers. Although she had always been uninterested in these things, she couldn't help but develop a thirst for knowledge about the Beander. Under Melissa's gaze, the already calm citrine pendulum suddenly began to spin rapidly clockwise. Melissa's eyes widened instantly, and she looked at the spinning citrine pendulum in amazement. Klein really did possess mysterious powers. It's the negative effect of a mystical item. Klein lifted his hand, and the citrine pendulum drew an arc, flying towards Klein's palm. The moment the citrine pendulum touched his palm, Klein closed his hand and put the citrine pendulum back into his pocket. "Mystical item?" Melissa asked curiously. "Negative effect." "Mystical items are objects with Beander powers," Klein said, choosing his words carefully. "Each mystical item has its own abilities, but at the same time, they all have negative effects. Some mystical items have very severe negative effects, making them very difficult to use. The negative effect of the mystical item you mentioned, although I don't know if it's all of its negative effects, currently seems severe. As long as you carry it, you will be teleported to other places within a certain range when you cross a corner or a door. Although it's not dangerous, it severely affects normal life and is difficult to utilize. Perhaps that mystical item has teleportation ability, which can offset some of the effects, or it's possible that the negative effects are limited, in terms of the number of teleports, the conditions for teleportation, the probability of teleportation, or some other aspects, allowing a Beander to use this mystical item normally. Melissa nodded, roughly understanding Klein's meaning. Are mystical items very precious to a Beander? Yes, very precious, and also very important, Klein nodded. To make Melissa clearly understand the preciousness and importance of mystical items, he thought for 2 seconds and then said, a Beander with a mystical item and a Beander without a mystical item are like a knight with a gun and a knight without a gun. Moreover, mystical items are very expensive, at least 400 pounds. The price of some powerful mystical items can reach 10,000 pounds or even more, and even more powerful mystical items do not circulate on the market at all. Oh, 100,000 pounds. Melissa's eyes widened instantly, her face full of disbelief, her hands trembling slightly. I actually took such a valuable item without permission. Thankfully, it was just a cat, otherwise, I might have already been arrested by the police. So valuable, why would the black cat allow me to take it? Melissa muttered to herself. Klein had already guessed the truth of the matter from Melissa's description, but of course, he couldn't tell her the truth. Perhaps that black cat doesn't have such high intelligence. After all, it's just a cat. The reason it carries a mystical item is that its owner uses it to circumvent the mystical item's negative effects. After discovering the collar was missing, its owner ordered it to retrieve it, which is why it appeared before you again to snatch the collar back. Klein argued seriously and with a solemn expression. Perhaps. Melissa lowered her eyes and replied after thinking for 2 seconds, now that the collar has been taken by it, it shouldn't come looking for me again, right? Klein thought for 2 seconds and then took out the citrine pendulum again. Melissa immediately looked over. Under the girl's gaze, the citrine pendulum slowly rotated counterclockwise. Just as she was about to ask Klein about the content of his divination, she saw Klein put the citrine pendulum down after retracting it, and divined again. This time, the pendulum still rotated counterclockwise. It will, Klein retracted the pendulum and said with a serious expression, in the future, you will encounter it again, but the divination result shows that it will not harm you. As if still not at ease, Klein added at the end, the divination result can only be used as a reference. This. Melissa looked troubled, feeling somewhat helpless for a moment. She bit her lip and asked, how can one obtain Beander powers? She couldn't rely on Klein every time, nor could she pin her hopes on that black cat. Klein was stunned, then a hint of difficulty appeared on his face, and his eyes flickered, avoiding Melissa's gaze. Klein. Melissa, Klein took a deep breath, and his lips moved as he said, becoming a Beander is a dangerous thing. I know. Melissa smiled and said, her voice soft, as if comforting Klein. Klein looked at his sister with a face full of surprise. Melissa chuckled softly, it's precisely because it's dangerous that Klein tried so hard to hide it from us, right? Klein stared blankly at his sister, the corners of his mouth unconsciously curving upwards slightly. After pondering for 2 seconds, he said earnestly, to become a Beander, one must drink a potion. Different potions result in different Beanders. There are a total of 22 pathways of potions, and each pathway has 9 sequences, ranging from sequence 9 to sequence 1. Drinking potions must be done in order, starting from sequence 9, then sequence 8, sequence 7. Melissa listened carefully as Klein explained the basic Beander knowledge. After Klein finished, she asked, is there a potion that can make a person know all mechanical-related knowledge? There isn't one for the initial sequence, but there are a few potions that can help you learn mechanical knowledge. Among them, the one I recommend most has the title Artisan at its sequence 6. Artisan. Melissa's eyes darted left and right, looking at Klein expectantly. Its name is, Klein deliberately paused, looked at Melissa, noticed her anxious expression, smiled, and continued, Savon. Chapter 131, The Bard's Formula. In a European-style courtyard, 2 exceptionally beautiful young ladies sat opposite each other. Beside them was a three-tiered dessert stand, laden with various exquisite and delicious desserts: king's cake, tarts, hot cross buns, jams, pies, fruit puddings. Many of the desserts Eve didn't know the names of, as they were all creations researched by the chefs hired by the Hall family, delicacies that could only be enjoyed within the Hall family. In front of Eve was a dish of apple-shaped ice cream. She used a silver spoon to scoop a small portion of ice cream and put it into her mouth. The cool, delicate texture and the rich, sweet taste immediately conquered her taste buds. The nobles' ice creams were like small sculptures, exquisite and beautiful. The chefs carved the ice cream into various shapes, then garnished it with petals or fruit, making them so beautiful that one was reluctant to disturb them. Beyond their beauty, the chefs also did not forget the ice cream's texture: soft cream, refreshing sorbet, delicious fruit, a perfect fusion that made summer taste like it. Eve usually didn't pay much attention to the appearance of food. If it looked edible, she was satisfied. Her cooking skills were only average, and if she tried to achieve both appearance and taste, she often failed at both. But who wouldn't like food that was both beautiful and delicious? If Miss Audrey hadn't been there, she would have already finished all the ice cream. Miss Audrey put down her small spoon, wiped her mouth with a handkerchief, and waited until Eve had swallowed her food before speaking. "Miss Eve, if I may be so bold as to ask, do you know of any gatherings in Backland?" She had already asked Furs and Sherman, but there was no news of the gathering they participated in being held this week. Eve had already guessed her intention when Miss Audrey dismissed the maids. She put down her spoon and said with a smile, "I do know of some gatherings." Does Miss Audrey need a formula or a charm? After all, when it comes to Beander materials, the Hall family's warehouse should already be piled as high as a mountain. Yes, Miss Audrey nodded. "I need a formula, the Bard's formula." After spending this time together, Miss Audrey knew that Eve was not someone who would pry, so she felt at ease telling her. In reality, it was also something that couldn't be kept secret. When Eve took her to a gathering, she would find out anyway. The Bard's formula. Eve chuckled lightly. Sunlight shone into her sea blue eyes, like stars falling into an ocean, beautiful and profound. "What a coincidence, I happen to know the Bard's formula." "Really?" Miss Audrey's eyes lit up, and her body unconsciously leaned forward slightly, her soft golden hair falling across her chest, swaying gently twice in the breeze. Of course, Eve placed her hands folded on her lap, sitting gracefully and properly. "If you are worried about the authenticity of the formula, you can take it first and pay the remuneration after that gentleman or lady becomes a bard." "No, of course, I trust Miss Eve's integrity." Miss Audrey immediately shook her head. "You are a trustworthy lady, I was just too surprised." As if to enhance the credibility of her words, Miss Audrey immediately added, "I will pay the remuneration." "What does Miss Eve need? Gold pounds, Beander materials, or a formula?" If it's a formula, it might take some time." Eve lowered her head, her eyes fixed on the ice cream in front of her, seemingly deep in thought. A few seconds later, Eve looked up and said, "Beander materials, I need an agate peacock's egg, is that acceptable?" An agate peacock's egg. Miss Audrey immediately thought of Miss Empress. She had also purchased an agate peacock's egg from her. The girl pursed her lips, hesitated for a few seconds, then her lips parted slightly, revealing a small gap. Her lips wiggled a few times, and then closed again. Currently, Miss Empress had not purchased any formulas at the Tarot Club, so Miss Audrey did not know Miss Empress's specific pathway and sequence. However, the materials she purchased were a breakthrough point. Through those Beander materials, one could deduce Miss Empress's specific pathway and sequence. If she asked Miss Eve which pathway and sequence the agate peacock's egg was a Beander material for, it would be equivalent to asking Miss Eve for an incomplete potion formula, and there was also the possibility of being misunderstood as probing her pathway. Miss Empress couldn't possibly not buy a formula, could she? Not buying now might be because her sequence is relatively high, and she thinks we don't have it. After Mr. Hanged Man, Mr. Sun, and I become mid-sequence or even high-sequence Beyonders, we should have a chance to know. It's also possible that Miss Empress already has the formula she needs and is currently collecting materials. If that's the case, then at the next tarot club, Miss Empress will request a formula. Moreover, there's no need for me to probe Miss Empress's specific pathway and sequence. For a Beander, their own pathway and sequence are things that cannot be easily told to others. Thinking this, Miss Audrey abandoned the idea of asking. Eve looked up, a standard, polite smile always on her face. Do you want me to tell you now, Miss Audrey? Miss Audrey nodded, her forest bright eyes looking earnestly at Eve. The main materials for a bard are 1 crystallized sunflower or 1 adult firestone bird's tail feather or 1 arsonist bird's tail feather, 1 siren stone or 1 singing sunflower. The supplementary materials are 1 midsummer grass, 5 drops of July wine juice, and 1 elf dark leaf. To prevent Miss Audrey from misunderstanding or not remembering, Eve thoughtfully repeated it twice. Miss Audrey listened carefully, memorizing the entire formula in her mind, repeating it over and over to prevent herself from making a mistake or forgetting. A few minutes later, after confirming that she had fully memorized it, Miss Audrey looked up and thanked her very happily. Thank you very much, Miss Eve. You're welcome. Eve smiled. This is just a normal transaction. Yes, I will deliver the agate peacock's egg to Miss Eve as soon as possible. Should I send it directly to Miss Eve's residence? Miss Audrey said. She had previously asked her brother Alfred to find an agate peacock's egg. Although she only asked for 1, Alfred still found 2 for his sister. The other was kept as a spare, and today, that spare came in handy. Eve nodded. After chatting for a while longer, the two concluded their afternoon tea. Miss Audrey stood up, bid farewell to Eve, and then scurried away, seemingly having something to do. Miss Audrey was wearing an emerald green dress embroidered with gold today. The wide bell sleeves completely covered the girl's arms, and the heavy skirt was supported by a crinoline. This was one of Miss Audrey's looser outfits, allowing her to make a scurrying motion. This outfit was actually quite warm to wear. Gentlemen and ladies of Loan always placed great importance on decorum, even in the hot summer. Gentlemen had to wear jackets, shirts, and top hats neatly, while ladies had to wear even more. Crinolines, petticoats, outer skirts, outer garments, their attire often reflected their status and wealth. Zhou Mingrui had once complained to her, missing his old short sleeves and air conditioning. Thinking of Zhou Mingrui, Eve then thought of Melissa, that intelligent girl who might become her future sister. Zhou Mingrui did not intend for Melissa to become an official Beander. Official Beyonders were far more dangerous than wild Beyonders, but he definitely wanted Melissa to have contact with the Nighthawks. Currently, he hadn't taught Melissa much Beander knowledge, only telling her not to listen, not to watch, to suppress her curiosity, and subtly hinting at the acting method. He also purchased a Savon potion for Melissa from her. To save expenses, Zhou Mingrui only bought the potion, not the formula, and Eve, being very honest, gave him an 80% discount. The supplementary materials for the potion were not expensive, so Eve didn't include them. A bottle of potion only cost the price of the main materials, £400, which, with an 80% discount, was £320. Because of hunting pirates, Zhou Mingrui had accumulated a good amount of savings, already considered a small wealthy man. Yet, when he paid, Eve always felt like she wasn't taking gold pounds, but Zhou Mingrui's flesh and blood. His hands were trembling, and his eyes were filled with heartache. Chapter 132, New Diary. Above the ancient gray fog, 3 streaks of red light suddenly surged out like a fountain, and in an instant, they gradually dissipated. As the red light receded, 3 figures were revealed. Good afternoon, Mr. Fool. Audrey stood up and greeted everyone cheerfully. This time, I found 2 pages of Rosal's diary. She had bought them from Miss Sherman. Audrey's tone carried a hint of anticipation. She had already paid her dues, and this Rosal's diary could be counted as her accumulated contribution to Mr. Fool. In the future, she could directly ask Mr. Fool for help or answers. As the girl spoke, she had already visualized Rosal's diary. Very good. Klein said with satisfaction, silently praying that there would be some useful information. He raised his hand, and the 2 pages of Rosal's diary flew into Klein's hand. January 17th, it's been a long time since I last saw Miss Margaret. I really miss her charming eyes. January 22nd, no, is he sick? March 4th, today I met Irene, a dependence of Eve. What a beautiful lady. Her soft brown hair and pretty blue eyes are truly captivating. Irene. Klein silently noted down the name in his heart. March 5th, I invited Miss Irene to go fishing, but she refused. She said she needed to manage the entire Rose School of Thought and was very busy, with no time for fishing at all. Is this why Eve is so leisurely? Ah, this. Klein sympathized with Miss Irene for a few seconds in his heart. March 16th, Mrs. Christ is pregnant. The woman I once liked is going to be a mother. It's a strange feeling. March 18th, holy shit. Eve said Mrs. Christ is pregnant with his younger brother. What's going on? Is his father still alive? And he even got him a younger brother. He's really vigorous in his old age. It's truly terrifying. If Eve suddenly told me now, I'm kidding, the child is actually yours, Rosal Gustav's, I wouldn't even be scared. Klein's pupils constricted. He tried to suppress the shock in his heart, gathering the gray fog around himself, completely obscuring himself to prevent Miss Justice from noticing anything unusual. So it's the reincarnation of his younger brother. That really scared me. By the way, is there reincarnation in this world? Klein also let out a sigh of relief. If Eve's father in this world still existed, then he might fall into the same predicament as himself. March 19th, I went to ask Eve about the specifics of his younger brother. Eve told me that his younger brother is named Ouroboros, a snake of fate, and they are not blood-related. I asked in surprise, is Ouroboros a snake demon? Eve looked at me at the time as if I were an idiot. He said that Snake of Fate is the name of a monster pathway sequence 1, and it also has another name called Snake of Fate. They have a special ability called Restart, and the current Ouroboros is in a restart state. It's another King of Angels at sequence 1. I need to quickly build good relations and expand my network of divine connections. Cultivating a golden finger should start from the fetus. By the way, how do I deepen my relationship with a fetus? If I talk to Ouroboros in front of him, can he hear me? But then Mrs. Christ would probably kick me out as a lunatic. Klein read with relish, remembering all the information mentioned in the diary. He knew more than Emperor Rosal at the time. Ouroboros was not a king of angels at sequence 1, but the king of angels, angel of fate. When he saw this name, he guessed that Ouroboros's pathway was related to fate, but he didn't know which one specifically. He wanted to continue reading, but that page of the diary was already gone, and the other page was clearly not a continuation of this entry. Klein thought with some regret, Mrs. Christ. I haven't heard of her. I'll go back and check the material. I hope I can find some clues. October 3rd, a long time has passed, but the lost ships still haven't been contacted. I've decided to try again after making a telegraph machine. Perhaps the forsaken land of the gods holds the way home. Klein looked at this passage, recalling the 3 pages of Rosal's diary he had seen in Mr. Neal's hands. One page had mentioned Emperor Rosal losing contact with ships searching for the forsaken land of the gods. He hadn't expected to see the continuation. However, Old Sister hadn't told Emperor Rosal about the forsaken land of the gods, otherwise Emperor Rosal wouldn't have needed to search for it at all. It's been too long since I came to this world. I feel like I'm about to forget my parents' appearance and voices. Klein silently looked at this sentence, feeling a bit lost for a moment. He knew that Emperor Rosal definitely hadn't succeeded. The forsaken land of the gods didn't have a way home, otherwise Old Sister would have already gone back. Emperor Rosal failed, and Old Sister didn't succeed. Can I succeed? No, don't think like that. Klein shook off the wild thoughts in his head. No matter what, he had to try, just in case. October 11th, Mr. Zaratul told me that if I want to search for the forsaken land of the gods, I can find Eve. He has a way to enter and exit the forsaken land of the gods. Why didn't you say something so important earlier? October 20th, I found even hoped he could take me to the forsaken land of the gods. He agreed and suggested I bring more food, and also gave me several bags that created independent space and could store things, telling me to fill all of them. Holy crap, does he want to eat me into bankruptcy? October 21st, I filled the bags. It really is going to cost me everything. Those nobles even thought there was going to be a war. October 23rd, I returned from the forsaken land of the gods today, and it was a deeply moving experience. Many cities have already been destroyed. In the 3 days in the forsaken land of the gods, I only saw 1 or 2 cities with survivors, but some of these survivors had already mutated. Eve said that the forsaken land of the gods cannot be cultivated normally, so these survivors can only survive by eating monsters, which not only tastes bad but also contains pollution. I knew why Eve suggested I bring food. I gave all the food I brought to the residents of the first city-state I encountered, but this food couldn't last long, and by the time I encountered the second city-state with survivors, I had no food left. Eve asked me if I wanted to continue, and I said of course. I asked him, are all the city-states in the forsaken land of the gods like this? Eve shook his head and told me that there is actually one city-state that is luckier than the others. They have normal food that can be eaten, but being in such an environment really doesn't fit the word, lucky. We didn't go to that special city-state, but continued in our original direction. On the way, we met a guy wearing a monocle, an annoying fellow. He parasiticized me before we even met. Whoever wants this greeting gift can have it, I certainly can't afford it. The diary entry ended abruptly here. Klein guessed that this day's entry wasn't about that specific day's events, but rather Emperor Rosel's summary of his journey to the forsaken land of the gods, which is why it was exceptionally long and couldn't fit on one page. The transcriber hadn't copied the subsequent content of this page onto the back. What a pity, Klein thought to himself. The special city-state should refer to the city of Silver, but who was that guy with the monocle? Klein felt that the continuation of this part should have mentioned that mysterious person, but now it ended abruptly, and he didn't even know the gender of that mysterious person. Parasiticize. This reminded him of the angel inside Leonard, so Emperor Rosel must have encountered a marauder demigod. Parasiticized before even meeting. It seems this demigod is not easy to get along with. Klein collected his thoughts, scanned the surroundings, and said, "You may now converse freely." Chapter 133, An Ancient Existence. Audrey turned her gaze to Derek and said with a smile, "Mr. Sun, I've obtained the Bard's formula." A clear smile appeared on Derek's face, and he immediately replied, "I've also obtained the psychoanalyst's formula." "That's wonderful," Audrey said happily, then turned to Klein and added, "Mr. Fool, we would like to request a private exchange." Klein nodded. After requesting a private exchange, Audrey was the first to speak. The main ingredients for the Bard are 1 crystallized sunflower, or a tail feather from an adult firestone bird or an arsonist bird, and 1 siren stone or 1 singing sunflower. The auxiliary ingredients are 1 midsummer grass, 5 drops of July wine sap, and 1 elven dark leaf. After speaking, Audrey repeated it twice to ensure Derek had remembered it. Listening to the formula, Derek was initially stunned. He knew that the City of Silver and Miss Justice used many different names, and the names used by the City of Silver were ancient terms for Miss Justice and her companions, many of which were no longer in use, and few even knew them. Derek had already prepared to ask Mr. Fool or Miss Empress for help. He then realized that Miss Justice might have considered his situation and specifically changed the names to ancient terms. His eyes immediately filled with gratitude. "Thank you very much, Miss Justice," Derek said with deep gratitude. "You're welcome," Audrey said cheerfully. "You also helped me find the psychoanalyst's formula." Derek scratched his head and said a little awkwardly, "But I couldn't change the names of the ingredients to the ones you use, yet Miss Justice specifically looked up the ancient names of the ingredients for me." Ancient names. Audrey was taken aback, a hint of confusion flashing across her face. "Are these ingredient names ancient terms?" "That's impossible," why would Miss Eve use ancient names for ingredients? The girl recalled the formula again in her mind, discovering a previously overlooked point of doubt, and muttered to herself, the Beyonder potion ingredients, can they be substituted? She didn't know much about Beyonders, having only seen 3 formulas in total. Previously, due to her trust in Eve, she hadn't had any suspicions. Could Miss Eve really be deceiving me? Is the formula fake? How could that be? Derek obviously hadn't expected such a development. He was stunned for a few seconds before recovering, and said uncertainly, I don't know the names of the ingredients used outside the Forsaken Land of the Gods. It's just that the names used in the City of Silver have never changed. Perhaps these ingredients were lucky enough not to have their names changed. Audrey frowned deeply, her right hand resting on her chest. She felt a sense of unease. If the Beyonder potion formula had an error, she couldn't even imagine it. Can the ingredients for a Beyonder potion be substituted? Audrey asked. I mean, the main ingredients. I don't know, Derek shook his head. Currently, I've only encountered the psychoanalyst Beyonder potion formula. Audrey lowered her eyes, her lips pressed tightly together, her emotions undetectable amidst the gray fog. I should be more vigilant. The transaction with Miss Eve wasn't a tarot club transaction, there was no Mr. Fool as a witness. The last time I went to a Beyonder gathering with Miss Eve to buy a formula, the organizer of the gathering had to verify the authenticity of the formula. However, even now, Audrey still didn't want to believe that Miss Eve was deceiving her. Miss Eve had even initially suggested that payment be made only after Sun became a bard. If the formula was truly fake, she was more inclined to believe that Miss Eve had also been deceived. I'm very sorry, Audrey took a deep breath, imagined the formula, turned her gaze towards Klein, raised her hand, and said, Mr. Fool, I wish to request verification of the formula's authenticity. The fool nodded, and with a wave of his hand, the paper with the bard's formula on it flew into his hand. Klein did not have the ability to discern the authenticity of formulas, at least not the ability to discern formula authenticity at the Tarot Club. The fool taking out a citrine pendulum to divine the authenticity of a Sequence 9 formula, that would be too much of a blow to the fool's prestige. Klein couldn't do something that's socially mortifying. But he wasn't flustered at all, because he knew clearly that this formula was obtained by Miss Justice from his old sister, and it absolutely wouldn't be fake. Klein pretended to glance at it, then returned the formula, and said in a deep voice, the formula is genuine. Audrey breathed a sigh of relief, her mood quickly recovering. She thought happily, Miss Eve is a trustworthy lady, she would never deceive me. But why did Miss Eve use ancient names? Or did the names of these ingredients really never change? The person who gave you the formula should be an ancient existence, Audrey heard Mr. Fool's deep, steady voice slowly say, this existence might have seen something. An ancient existence. Miss Eve might be more powerful and ancient than I imagined. That's truly amazing. Audrey's eyes lit up, her beautiful forest green eyes sparkling with pride. Derek and Audrey focused on different things. He asked with some trepidation, saw something. Did this existence see that Miss Justice was trading with me, a resident of the City of Silver? Thinking of the potential dangers and opportunities hidden behind this, Derek's mood instantly became like a overturned spice rack, various emotions jumbled together in a mess. Perhaps. The fool replied indifferently, neither denying nor confirming. Klein had no psychological burden about exposing Eve's identity. He didn't believe Eve would make such a big error. If Eve minded exposing her identity, even to accommodate Sun, she wouldn't have produced such a formula under the identity of Eve. She could have completely answered Sun's questions for free under the identity of Empress. She wasn't afraid of others exposing her identity, which could be seen from how she walked the world with her real name and appearance. To be honest, Klein even suspected that if one day in the future, Eve herself voluntarily revealed her identity just to give Miss Justice a big surprise, he wouldn't be surprised. If old sister really did that. Klein imagined it. How mischievous. Without receiving a precise answer, Derek's expression was somewhat dim. He looked up and told Audrey the psychoanalyst's formula in a flat tone. The trading session ended, and it was now time for free conversation. Klein sat at the head, quietly listening to their conversation, and when it was about time, he announced the end of the meeting. The members of the Tarot Club stood up and bowed, saying, "Your will is our desire. Welcome to Fanfic Audiobook, your go-to place for immersive audiobooks. If you enjoy the content, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to our channel for more amazing stories. And please support the author by link in description." Chapter 134, My Seer Student. Sunlight streamed through the French windows, scattering across the mahogany floor and stopping just short of the wide-armed armchair's feet. Ornate and mysterious patterns of vines and flowers coiled around the smooth, off-white armchair backrest, but they were obscured by the beautiful lady leaning on the chair, unable to display their charm. The girl's eyelashes trembled slightly a few times before she slowly opened her eyes. "Come on, Audrey," the girl silently encouraged herself in her heart after descending from Saphira Castle. She took out paper and pen from the drawer, preparing to organize her thoughts and make a plan. Currently, there were only 4 things she needed to do. First, help Sun find the next formula. A sequence 9 formula couldn't be traded for a sequence 7 formula, so she needed to continue helping Sun find a sequence 8 formula. She already had a direction for this, Miss Eve. If Miss Eve was truly an ancient existence, then she should have many formulas. Audrey decided to start with Miss Eve. Second, digest the potion. Audrey could feel that her potion was already half digested, and she might be able to advance to telepathist in a month. Third, test whether Miss Furs was related to the Abraham family. Audrey already had a clue for this as well. She planned to recopy her mysticism notebook, then select some of the information provided by Miss Queen, and place it towards the beginning. She would then let Miss Furs see it when the right opportunity arose. She had already copied 1/3 of it, and for authenticity, Audrey planned to hide the real one and make the fake one look older. Although Audrey cherished her notebook and had always kept it in excellent condition, the ravages of time treat everything equally. Fourth, investigate Miss Eve's identity. Audrey currently had no leads on this and planned to start with Ruru. Audrey went through everything in her mind, then wrote down these 4 tasks on paper in order of priority, marking some information next to each task. She wrote a lot in a jumbled fashion. The pendulum of the wall clock swung continuously. About half an hour later, Audrey sat up and took a box of matches from the drawer. Scratch. The orange-yellow flame flickered slightly, reflected in her emerald-green eyes. Audrey slowly brought the flame closer to the paper filled with her plans, watching the flame gradually consume the paper, spewing out wisps of ash. Just like a detective in a novel, Audrey thought excitedly as she dealt with the ashes. Detective girl Audrey and her assistant Susie will overcome numerous obstacles to find the truth. After descending from Saphira Castle, Klein did not lie back on his soft, comfortable bed as he usually did to enjoy his holiday. Klein dressed and then left with his cane. He wanted to earn back double the membership fee before he left, then confidently hand it to Melissa, assuring his sister that he wasn't a foolish brother who wasted money. "No, I am indeed a foolish fellow." Sitting in the carriage heading to the club, Klein thought of his receding holiday, feeling even more grief. "If I can't raise the price, I can only work overtime." Klein had regretted more than once his initial branding of himself as a true seer, which now prevented him from raising his prices at all. Sigh. After silently sighing in his heart, Klein comforted himself. "My reputation is already established, and many people come to me for divinations. Little by little, it adds up. A penny here, a penny there, becomes a sower. A sower saved up becomes a pound." Inside the carriage, Klein calculated his divination income. Outside, the sound of horses' hooves clattered continuously. The coachman gripped the reins tightly, navigating through the crowd, and delivered his passengers to their destination. Klein picked up his cane and followed the flow of people out of the carriage. "Good afternoon, Mr. Klein," Ms. Angelica at the reception desk said with her usual warmth. "Yesterday, a gentleman came looking for you for a divination, but unfortunately, you weren't here." That gentleman will be coming to the club again today. My reputation is growing, Klein nodded, thinking with some pride. Good afternoon, Ms. Angelica, Klein said, slightly tipping his top hat in greeting. You are as beautiful as ever today. I'm pleased by the news you bring. I'm glad you like the news. I told that gentleman, Angelica said, that Mr. Klein has a high probability of appearing at the club after 3 o'clock on Monday afternoon. Klein smiled and joked, that sounds like you're trying to figure out how to catch me. Haha, Ms. Angelica laughed along. Loosely speaking, it is indeed a kind of capture. Of course, we won't use nets or other tools, but rather tea and coffee. Well then, Klein lifted his cane, I would like a cup of tea, thank you very much. Oh, no problem. Does Mr. Klein want to go to the lounge first? Ms. Angelica replied cheerfully. Klein nodded and followed Angelica through the corridor to an empty lounge. Ms. Angelica brewed the tea and hurried back to the reception desk. Klein picked up the tea, sipping it while waiting for the seeker. The tea gradually diminished, bit by bit. When about half remained, Klein heard a knock at the door. Angelica's voice followed, Mr. Klein, someone is here for a divination. Which divination room would you like to use? The citrine room. Klein opened the door, turned his head, and looked behind Angelica. A familiar figure came into view. Mr. Azek. Why was Mr. Azek here? Was he the gentleman from yesterday? Klein's confusion didn't last long, as Ms. Angelica provided him with the answer. This gentleman is the one who came for a divination yesterday. You weren't here then, so he chose Mr. Ian McCall. Why is everyone coming to the Seer Club? Klein thought somewhat awkwardly. I never noticed Mr. Azek liked divination before. Is it because of past events? Good afternoon, Klein. Azek's steady voice suddenly sounded. He leaned on his cane and took 2 steps forward to stand beside the two of them. Good afternoon, Mr. Azek. Klein used his clown ability to control his expression, greeting Mr. Azek as usual, but his eyes subconsciously glanced behind Mr. Azek, wanting to see if that familiar figure was there. A look of surprise appeared in Ms. Angelica's eyes as she watched the two of them. For some reason, seeing this scene suddenly reminded her of Mr. Klein's sister from 2 weeks ago. At the time, Angelica had guessed that something was amiss, but out of professional courtesy, she hadn't asked anything, nor had she asked Mr. Klein about it later. The beautiful lady dutifully took out a key and opened the citrine divination room. Klein saw the divination room door open and also breathed a sigh of relief, immediately inviting Mr. Azek inside. They needed a private space to talk. Chapter 135, Divination Results. I saw your name on the roster, Azek said, sitting in a wide armchair, his eyes filled with the gentle warmth of an elder. It's quite a surprise. I'm surprised too, Klein said, a slight curve to his lips, subconsciously caressing the citrine pendulum wrapped around his left hand. Mr. Azek, is the Seer Club for divining your own past. Although Mr. Azek's sudden appearance at the club brought back a not-so-pleasant memory, Mr. Azek wasn't Melissa. He was a powerful, special Beander, and there was no need for him to hide anything from Mr. Azek. Yes, Azek said. Miss Eve recommended the Seer Club to me. I thought that since it was Miss Eve's suggestion, there might be clues to my past here. Klein fell silent. Please don't think of her as so reliable. Klein opened his mouth, but the words circled on his tongue and then were swallowed back. It was always like this when old sister was old brother. He was always polite to unfamiliar people, but once he got familiar, he would gradually open up, and in front of close friends, he would completely let himself go. So, in front of unfamiliar people, old sister was reliable both subjectively and objectively. And from Azek and Eve's interaction, Mr. Azek should belong to the unfamiliar category. Of course, it doesn't rule out the possibility of Eve deliberately faking it, but it certainly doesn't belong to close relationships. So, for Mr. Azek, Eve was indeed reliable. However, this sentence is definitely an overinterpretation, Klein silently added in his heart. Even as he thought this, Klein still opened his mouth and said, Mr. Azek thinks the clue is with me. No, Azek shook his head and said gently, perhaps there are no clues. When he spoke of there being no clues, Mr. Azek remained as gentle and composed as ever, with a hint of a smile in his eyes, showing no disappointment whatsoever. Azek paused for a moment, then continued, perhaps Miss Eve just said it casually, or perhaps she wanted to help you attract customers, but trying it here isn't a difficult thing, is it? Yesterday, I saw your name on the roster. The lady told me you might come to the club after 3 o'clock on Monday afternoon, so I thought I'd come to see you and, incidentally, find a true seer to divine my past. The true seer is right in front of you, Mr. Azek. Klein held the citrine pendulum, which hung from his wrist, in his hand, rubbing it over and over. Mr. Azek, I am a seer, and can divine for you. What method of divination would you like to use, Mr. Azek? Though, because of your status, I don't know what I can divine. Azek was not surprised. He nodded and asked, use whatever you're good at. Do I need to do anything? Could I ask Mr. Azek to step out for a moment? Just a short while is fine. I can't sleep with someone watching me, Klein added in his heart. All right, Azek replied, got up, and left the room. As he stepped out of the citrine room, he turned and considerately closed the door. Klein withdrew his gaze, picked up the paper and pen on the table, and wrote down the divination statement. Mr. Azek Eggers's past. No, that's too broad. Klein crossed out the statement with his fountain pen, then pulled out another piece of paper and wrote. Mr. Azek Eggers's experiences before his amnesia. That should do it. Klein thought for a few seconds, decided it would work, put down the pen, leaned back, and quickly entered a dream state using meditation while resting in the armchair. In the hazy, dark world, Klein vaguely saw a black mausoleum. The tall mausoleum resembled a pyramid, but it was inverted and embedded in the ground. Black mist covered the mausoleum, as if hiding a secret. In front of the black inverted pyramid, within the mist, Klein could see many figures, whose height and build were extremely similar. Klein suddenly woke up, opening his eyes. He pressed his right hand on the armrest, used his wrist to sit up, then placed his left hand on his forehead, resting it on the table, and massaged his brow. Those figures, were they people Mr. Azek knew in the past? That can't be. How could everyone Mr. Azek knew have the same build? And what did the black inverted mausoleum symbolize? This couldn't be a mausoleum from the northern continent. He was barely an expert in this area and wouldn't make a mistake. If so, then it was highly likely to be a mausoleum from the southern continent, and coincidentally, Mr. Azek's past was related to the southern continent. Klein lowered his left hand, lost in thought. His intuition told him this should be an important symbol. Mr. Azek might know, having researched the culture of the southern continent. Klein stood up and quickly walked to the door, opening it. Mr. Azek. Azek nodded slightly and returned to the armchair with Klein, asking gently, what were the results of the divination? I saw a black inverted mausoleum, with many similar figures standing in front of it, Klein answered truthfully. A black inverted mausoleum. A trace of surprise flashed in Azek's eyes, his brows furrowed slightly, and his hand instinctively reached to tightly grip his cane, only to find it empty. The sudden sensation made his body stiffen, and he came back to his senses. Klein noticed Mr. Azek's expression and was very surprised, but his clown ability prevented him from showing it. The black inverted mausoleum is the inverted pyramid of the southern continent, meaning a passage from the human world into the underworld. And whether in the former Balam Empire, or its branches, such as the currently existing Highland Kingdom and other places, only so-called death descendants can build such mausoleums for themselves. In a sense, this is the symbol of death. Azek finished speaking, then paused again and gave a bitter smile, continuing, yesterday's divination result was also death. Yesterday's divination result was also death. Klein was stunned, his brows slightly furrowed, and he subconsciously caressed the citrine pendulum wrapped around his left hand, over and over, his mind racing. He had met Mr. Ian McCall, who was not a Beander, but Mr. Ian's divinations were indeed very accurate. Ordinary people could also perform divination, but the effects were not good, and there were very few correct outcomes. Klein guessed that Mr. Ian's spirituality was probably higher than ordinary people's, which made his divinations more accurate. But could an ordinary person really divine death? We chose tarot divination, Azik added. Although the death card in tarot has no connection to death, such a result still makes me uneasy. If my past truly is related to death or death descendants, I think I would lose the courage to explore it. So it was the death card from tarot. Klein exhaled in relief, his body relaxed, and he clasped his hands in front of him, saying, Mr. Azik, was your death card upright or reversed? Upright. Azik let out a soft breath, looking somewhat timid. Mr. Ian McCall advised me to move out of my old state. Klein said nothing. He shouldn't interfere presumptuously. Giving up a stable life now to pursue an unknown past was a difficult choice. In an instant, the citrine room fell silent. A few seconds later, Azik raised his head and said gently, as usual, thank you very much, Klein. Chapter 136 Farewell. Azik pulled out a 1 banknote from his wallet and handed it to Klein. Good thing I have change on me, Klein thought, taking the banknote. He pulled out a few pence in change from his pocket, only to see Mr. Azik already rising from his seat, preparing to leave. Please wait a moment, Mr. Azik, Klein quickly called out, the divination only costs 8 pence. I know, that includes the tip. Azik nodded, gentle and kind, like a loving elder. This, after a second's hesitation, Klein accepted the tip, then turned to thank Mr. Azik and bid him farewell. Excellent, a good start. Klein curved his lips, looking forward to the next supplicant. But to his disappointment, a true seer was a title that spread with his name, and supplicants would always say when recommending him, that Mr. Moretti is a true seer, a seer unmoved by money. The subsequent supplicants all strictly followed the principles of Mr. Seer Moretti. After seeing off the third supplicant, Klein stood up from his seat, picked up the cane leaning against the table, and left the Seer Club. Instead of going home, he went to the Silver Crown restaurant. Leonard had already become a Red Gloves and would be leaving Tingen tomorrow for Backlund to undergo special training. Before leaving, he booked a table at the Silver Crown restaurant and invited all the Nighthawks in Tingen, naturally including Klein. Klein had told Melissa and Benson yesterday that he wouldn't be home for dinner tonight. Thinking of this, Klein couldn't help but sigh. His potion digestion speed was very fast and wouldn't require 2 months. The 2 months reserved were actually for accumulating contributions. His contributions in the Spawn of Evil God incident were not enough to simultaneously exchange for the Sequence 8 and Sequence 7 Seer potions. If Klein didn't accumulate enough contributions within 2 months, he would ask Eve to create some Beander incidents, but Klein still hoped to follow the normal path as much as possible. This was a last resort. His constant presence at the Seer Club also had the intention of seeking out Beander incidents. The carriage wheels rolled forward, the clatter of horse hooves echoing continuously, then gradually slowing down and fading away, finally disappearing. The carriage stopped by the roadside, and Klein dismounted, walking into the restaurant. He had originally thought he was early, but he didn't expect half of the people to have already arrived. As Klein took his seat, Roseanne was holding the menu and ordering, constantly muttering, Intis pan-fried foie gras, full-sack potato pancakes, fruit salad, oh, I'll have a salad, I like salad. Hey, Klein, you're here. The girl looked up at Klein, handed him the menu, and asked, is there anything you'd like? Oh, wait a moment, Klein hadn't even spoken when Roseanne suddenly pulled back her hand holding the menu. I forgot to order a drink, I'll have a cup of Fernand Po black tea. After speaking, the girl stood up and gave the menu to Klein. Klein took the menu and ordered a cheese steak, a portion of smoked salmon, and a bottle of cider. After about 5 minutes, all the Nighthawks had arrived. The lively dinner concluded after enjoying the delicious food. Klein was about to leave when he saw Leonard signal him to stay. After everyone else had left, Leonard mysteriously leaned in front of Klein, pulled out a military knife, and a cold glint flashed across Klein's brown eyes. Klein, In Leonard's hand, the military knife was exceptionally agile, dancing between his fingers like an excellent performer. This looks like the prelude to a murder now, Klein inwardly grumbled. The military knife was suddenly tossed into the air, falling straight down. Klein instinctively took a step back, worried about being hit by the knife, but Leonard didn't dodge, reaching out to firmly grasp the hilt of the military knife. "This is for you." Leonard pushed the hand holding the knife forward, smiling and whispering, "Last time I saw you staring at this knife." Klein understood, realizing Leonard had misunderstood. He opened his mouth, wanting to explain, but then suddenly remembered that Leonard really could be deceived, and the possibility wasn't small. Could Leonard really have been tricked? Klein pondered for 2 seconds, then asked, "Leonard, do you like military knives? Do you have several military knives, all like this, shiny?" If Leonard had just bought one out of curiosity, then he wouldn't mention it. "I wouldn't say I like them, I was just curious when I first saw them, and their appearance really appealed to me," Leonard said. "Besides this one, I have 4 others, all like this. I bought them from a merchant in Lindbergh. Actually, I only wanted to buy one, but he said if I bought 5, I'd only pay for 4. Klein fell silent. "What an obvious consumption trap, my poet friend," Klein inwardly grumbled, "but if he only bought them once out of curiosity, I won't remind him." Slap. As Klein was pondering, he suddenly felt a hand clap his shoulder. He instinctively reached for the revolver under his armpit, turning his head vigilantly. "Old sister." "Hey, my dear Klein," Eve patted Klein's shoulder again, grinning, surprised. Unexpected. Klein was stunned for a moment, then immediately got into character, respectfully saying, "Your Highness, how did you come?" Although old sister hadn't explicitly stated their relationship, no matter what kind of relationship it was, in the eyes of outsiders, Eve was a mysterious presence who suddenly appeared beside Klein and was very good to him. Therefore, Klein's attitude towards Eve should be respectful and distant, at most with a hint of familiarity. Leonard didn't react immediately to Eve's appearance. It was only after Klein spoke that he was pulled back to his senses by Klein's voice. "Your Highness." Leonard immediately followed Klein, greeting her. In an instant, he shed his usual nonchalant demeanor, appearing respectful and steady. The moment Eve appeared, Pales's nerves immediately tensed, constantly ready to change hosts. Although for some unknown reason, Eve had not handed him over to Aemon, Pales had not forgotten that Eve had played a part in the downfall of the Jacob family. In Pales's eyes, Eve's attitude towards Aemon was extremely ambiguous. She outwardly did not support him, but secretly provided Aemon with some help. Therefore, even though Eve was now sending friendly signals to Pales, Pales remained highly vigilant. Otherwise, he wouldn't have been so eager for Leonard to go to Backland. "Don't be nervous," Eve said with a smile, "I just came to bid farewell to an old friend." An old friend? Leonard was stunned. Was the old man's relationship with His Highness very good? Pales couldn't read Leonard's thoughts, nor did he need to. He could tell what the boy was thinking from his reaction. Pales snorted coldly, letting Leonard greet her on his behalf. "Actually, I'm here for another matter," Eve said, crossing her arms. "The Beander characteristic I gave you came from a demigod of the Jacob family." Pales was somewhat surprised, not expecting Eve to be able to obtain a Jacob family demigod's characteristic. For him, obtaining a Jacob family demigod's characteristic was more difficult than obtaining an Aemon family demigod's characteristic. The former was truly hard to trace and extremely rare in quantity. If this was the only demigod left of the Jacob family, Pales felt an urge to curse Aemon and Eve, but his good upbringing prevented him from doing so. This demigod also had a student, Eve continued. "You consumed that young lady's teacher's characteristic, aren't you going to look after that young lady?" "I understand." Pales pondered for 2 seconds before replying. Leonard immediately repeated Pales's words, dutifully acting as a messenger. Eve chuckled twice, waved to Leonard, and then left, as if she had truly only come to bid farewell to an old friend. Klein and Leonard exchanged glances, then Klein took the military knife and followed Eve out. Chapter 137, Flipping Over. Leonard left Tingen. Klein still went to the Seer Club every day, hoping to find Beyonder events to accumulate his contributions. Unfortunately, Beyonder events were rare, and Klein hadn't encountered one yet, but he wasn't anxious, waiting day by day. Until Miss Elizabeth, Melissa's classmate, brought him a clue to a Beyonder event. What surprised him, however, was that this Beyonder event actually had an unexpected surprise. Narcissus Street. The heavy, dark curtains blocked the windows, helping the homeowner keep the sunlight out. Although it was already getting late and there was no sunlight, they still hadn't been opened. In the dim room, Eve, wearing a cream-colored nightgown, squatted on a wooden chair, her eyes fixed on the open book on the table. In her hand, she held a piece of paper, constantly folding it into various shapes, then unfolding it, and folding it again. The origami shapes were a bit crude, but the species they represented were still discernible. New creases constantly appeared on the white paper, like scars, making the paper soft and crumpled. Eve felt a bit bored, her sudden interest came and went quickly. She casually closed her palm, squeezing the paper, gradually turning it into a paper ball. Flipping her palm, the girl rubbed the paper ball between her two hands, one on the left, one on the right, facing each other. Suddenly, her right hand quickly pulled back, and the paper ball instantly leapt out of her palm, arcing through the air to land on the book placed on the table. It bounced twice on the book before finally settling gently upon it. Perfect score, Eve thought to herself, simultaneously extending her legs, no longer curling her entire body on the seat. Then, she braced her knees against the edge of the table and leaned back abruptly. The front legs of the chair lifted off the ground with her movement. The entire wooden chair was now supported only by the two edges of its back legs. Her long black hair cascaded down, swaying with the rocking wooden chair in the air. Eve slightly curled her legs, shortening the distance between herself and the wooden table, and reached out to pick up the book on the table. Suddenly, Eve felt a searing, immense pain within her body, but the intense pain vanished without a trace in an instant. Eternal blazing sun. Eve felt a little confused. She retracted the leg that was braced against the edge of the table, leaned forward, and sat back in the chair. She saw a bright flame suddenly erupt from her clone in backland, instantly consuming the clone, leaving no ashes behind. Strange. Eve recalled carefully, confirming that she shouldn't have offended him. Then what was he angry about? After a few seconds of thought, Eve shifted her gaze to the full-length mirror in the living room. As a demoness, her residence had quite a few mirrors. Under Eve's gaze, the full-length mirror rippled, then revealed a figure extremely familiar to Eve, Klein. Eve had a feeling of being both unexpected and within reason. She placed a hand on her chest, her brows slightly furrowed, having some conjectures about the current situation. It truly is you, Eve thought with a bitter smile. If Klein provoking the eternal blazing sun happened in Saphira Castle, then she knew why the eternal blazing sun was so angry. Eve silently sighed in her heart, preparing to find Klein to inquire about the details. The divination results did not show Klein's specific location, but the dense gray fog swirling around Klein already explained everything. Eve stood up, walked 4 steps counterclockwise in the center of the living room, and chanted. Immortal Venerable who blesses the profound and mysterious heavens. Heavenly Lord who blesses the profound and mysterious heavens. God who blesses the profound and mysterious heavens. Celestial worthy of heaven and earth for blessings. Klein opened the door of Saphira Castle to her. Eve ascended Saphira Castle, slowly walked to Klein's side, scrutinizing the somewhat disheveled Klein from head to toe, and feigned surprise, saying, "Mr. Fool, what happened to you?" Klein couldn't help but want to roll his eyes at Eve. He touched his still heaving chest and, with a hint of relief after escaping a disaster, said, "I was almost burned to death by the eternal blazing sun." "Don't worry," Eve patted Klein's shoulder and comforted him, "he didn't really want to kill you, otherwise you wouldn't even have ashes left now. Just like my clone in Backland." Eve silently added in her heart. "Tell me." Eve sat in Miss Justice's seat, assuming a posture of listening intently, and said, "Let me hear about your grand feat. A sequence 8 daring to challenge a true god. You could definitely win first place in the 5th Epic's Bravest Beyander Award, if such an award existed. It's a pity there's no such strange award. I wouldn't get the first place prize, Klein also mocked himself. He paused for a few seconds, organized his words, and recounted the entire incident. Eve's expression gradually grew serious. Things were indeed as she had expected. Klein directly looked at the eternal blazing sun in Saphira Castle, which was equivalent to Eve telling the eternal blazing sun that she had deceived him while also mocking him to his face. However, things were still under control. The eternal blazing sun merely destroyed an insignificant clone to vent his anger, which also indirectly showed his attitude. He was displeased but still willing to maintain a good relationship with Eve. After all, the scales of victory had already tipped in Eve's favor. With the matter already settled, he couldn't possibly abandon his chaos demoness out of temporary pique. She just didn't know if the eternal blazing sun would share this little piece of knowledge with the Lord of Storms and the God of Knowledge and Wisdom, but whether he shared it or not, it didn't matter. Klein being exposed to the eyes of the gods was only a matter of time. Klein noticed Eve's expression growing increasingly serious, and his heart immediately tightened. He asked nervously, "What's wrong?" "It's very serious." Eve clasped her hands under her chin, her face stern as she stared at Klein. Klein immediately felt as if his heart was gripped tightly by a large hand, and his breathing hitched. Eve silently watched Klein. After a long while, she slowly opened her mouth and said, "Actually, it's not that serious." "Serious but not serious," Eve said. "This might not be a bad thing for you. Of course, you can't look directly at the eternal blazing sun again. Be careful he doesn't beat you up." The breath that was stuck in Klein's chest finally exhaled. "I know." Klein guessed that if he looked directly at the eternal blazing sun one more time, the eternal blazing sun might directly pinpoint Saphira Castle. Eve glanced at Klein, then withdrew her gaze. With the apocalypse approaching, in order to cultivate a Lord of the Mysteries as quickly as possible, all the gods would make certain concessions. The 3 gods could not support Aemon. If Klein continued to grow at his current speed, he might gain the support of the 3 gods. Whether this matter was good or bad primarily depended on whether Klein had the desire to become the Lord of the Mysteries. Thinking of this, Eve couldn't help but sigh and rub her hair. In her heart, the most suitable candidate for the Lord of the Mysteries was Bethel. Aemon was a secondary choice, and Zhou Mingrui. All Eve could do now was to quickly make him a sequence 2 angel. As for the rest, it would depend on Zhou Mingrui's choice. Chapter 138, Sun Charm. One more thing. Klein imagined the oil painting he had seen, and it floated in midair. With a wave of his hand, the painting drifted in front of Eve. "This is a portrait of Baron Ramad I." Eve raised her hand and took the floating oil painting. Her sea blue eyes lowered, and her gaze swept over the painting twice. The oil painting depicted Baron Ramad I wearing a white curly wig, with soft features, bronze skin, and an inconspicuous black mole near his right earlobe. It was very clear that this Baron Ramad I was Mr. Isaac Eggers. Eve looked up, her gaze shifting to Klein. She tossed the oil painting to him, her eyes signaling Klein to continue. "This Baron Ramad I looks exactly like Mr. Isaac. This shouldn't be a coincidence." Klein steadily caught the oil painting, flipped the portrait of Baron Ramad I to face Eve, and pointed at the Baron's likeness in the painting as he said, "I plan to tell Mr. Isaac about this. Perhaps it can help Mr. Isaac recall some of his past." Eve nodded, changed to a more comfortable posture, leaned forward, rested her right hand on her cheek, and casually asked, "So, you want me to go with you?" Klein nodded, placing the portrait in his hand on the long bronze table. "Perhaps seeing you will make Mr. Isaac remember more." Eve mused for 2 seconds before saying, "It's not impossible. After all, I don't have any urgent matters. The time is up to you. Tomorrow afternoon after the Tarot Club ends, I suppose. I'm with Captain and the others in Ramad Town now, and I won't be back until tomorrow," Klein said thoughtfully. "Okay," Eve replied, pushing herself up from the bronze table. She was about to leave when Klein suddenly called out to her. Eve turned to look at Klein. Klein looked at Eve in front of him, And a strange idea suddenly popped into his head. If he opened his spirit vision now, he should be able to get a lot of assassin pathway potion formulas and valuable Beyonder knowledge from Eve for free, and the formulas would be complete ones with substitutes. The moment this thought appeared, Klein kicked it out of his mind. After all, old sister had already taught him such valuable Beyonder knowledge for free. If he were to do that again, it would be too much. One couldn't just keep fleecing the same sheep. Moreover, besides Eve, there were no other Beyonders of the assassin pathway in the Tarot Club, so transactions could only happen offline. In Beyonder gatherings, potion formulas and charms were difficult items to sell, the latter due to time constraints, and the former because it was hard to verify their authenticity. What's more, the feeling of looking directly at a deity was quite unpleasant. Jumbled thoughts rapidly appeared and vanished in his mind. Klein cleared his throat twice to suppress the chaotic thoughts and said, "Could you sacrifice some materials for making a sun charm to me? I want to use the divine blood of the eternal blazing sun from 30782 to create the charm. It would be best if you could sacrifice them to me within an hour." Using divine blood to make a charm, that's quite a grand gesture. Eve raised an eyebrow, her eyes twinkling with a smile as she said, "Truly worthy of being Mr. Fool." "No, I am not the fool." Klein felt the temperature of his face rising. He lowered his head, his gaze darting left and right, not daring to look at Eve. This was not the first time. Every time Eve called him the fool, Klein felt his embarrassment break through the atmosphere and rush into the cosmos. "Haha," Eve chuckled playfully. "Charms made from divine blood are very powerful. Not just charms, divine blood can be said to be a super buff." Eve extended both index fingers, crossing them to form a cross. "I have a mystical item that also contains divine blood." After speaking, she lowered her hands, not continuing to introduce her mystical item, but instead reminded Klein, however, there might be some danger during the creation process. "I will be watching you." Klein nodded, said, "Thank you," and watched Eve leave Saphira Castle. Narcissus Street. Eve took out one charm material after another from the mirror. A carving knife, 2 thin gold flakes, sun, essential oil extracted from a mixture of black-edged, gold-edged, and white-edged sunflowers, golden bergamot powder, rosemary powder, and 3 candles. Eve arranged all the materials on the table. After confirming them, she began to sacrifice them to Klein. Klein had been waiting in Saphira Castle, and as soon as the gate of sacrifice formed, he immediately pushed it open and obtained the materials he needed. The moment the materials appeared, Klein noticed the 2 thin gold flakes among the pile. The symbolic metal of the eternal blazing sun is gold, which is even more expensive than the goddess's silver. These ritual materials are the most expensive. Klein silently mourned for his wallet for 2 seconds in his heart, closed his eyes, and wrapped himself in spirituality, simulating the feeling of falling. Eve did not send the essential oils and other spiritual materials that Klein needed for the sacrificial ritual, but it didn't matter. As the fool himself, he didn't need the step of pleasing a deity at all. Eve cast her gaze towards Klein. In her sea blue eyes, Klein found a hidden place where he successively performed the sacrifice and bestowal, and finally began to make the charm. She noticed that the prayer Klein used when creating the charm was recited in unguarded but highly effective ancient Hermes, the first line being, "Blood of the eternal blazing sun." In this way, the object of the prayer bypassed the eternal blazing sun and became the mutated sun medallion. He must be afraid of being recognized by the eternal blazing sun as the blasphemer who dared to look directly at a deity. Quite cautious, but unfortunately, deities are not that easy to conceal. Although Klein had done everything he could to avoid the eternal blazing sun to the greatest extent, Eve still perceived the eternal blazing sun's gaze directed at Klein. As the incantation neared its end, Klein's body began to change. He started to sweat, and the edges of his hair slowly curled. Eve watched Klein pick up the carving knife and draw symbolic patterns, corresponding spiritual numbers, magical symbols, and ancient incantations on both sides of the gold flake. As the last stroke fell, Klein regained his clarity. The eternal blazing sun and Eve simultaneously withdrew their gazes. After safely creating the sun charm, Klein truly breathed a sigh of relief. Although he had old sister's blessing, Klein was still very worried and added some protective measures himself, allowing his ritual to bypass the eternal blazing sun and directly pray to the mutated sun medallion. Klein carefully observed the sun charm. The spirituality on both sides of the gold flake was closer to divinity, suddenly forming a single entity. Another trump card. Klein thought happily to himself. Chapter 139, Shared Blessed. Amidst the gray fog, the magnificent palace resembled a setting sun in the river of time, mottled yet splendid. Klein knew it was time to begin after Eve ascended Saphira Castle, but to be safe, he still took out his pocket watch and glanced at it. The minute hand was indeed pointing to the number 12. Klein raised his hand and touched the 3 crimson stars one by one. Red light, gushing like a fountain, followed, rapidly emerging and then gradually dissipating. After the red light receded, 3 figures appeared amidst the gray fog. "Good afternoon, Mr. Fool." Miss Audrey, as vibrant as ever, greeted the fool with a cheerful tone. "This time, I've collected 2 more pages of Rosal's diary." Audrey held up 2 fingers, her tone carrying a hint of pride. She was now the biggest contributor in the entire Tarot Club and could directly exchange for knowledge and formulas from Mr. Fool. "Very good." Klein nodded. Justice's collection progress was beyond Klein's expectations. After all, he had only obtained 3 pages of Rosal's diary the first time, and according to his speculation, subsequent acquisitions would be more difficult. Alger tightly clasped his hands, a sense of crisis rising in his heart. He could feel his role in the Tarot Club diminishing. He hadn't produced Rosal's diary in these last few Tarot Club meetings, and in terms of Beander knowledge, he was far inferior to the Empress. Eve noticed Alger's abnormality, her eyes shifting, yet there was no ripple in her gaze. He knew what Alger was worried about. Alger concealed his ambition very well. Eve claimed to have no discerning eye for people, but 3 millennia of experience allowed her to see through many things based solely on experience. This is what it means to be old and cunning, Eve mused inwardly. Eve withdrew her thoughts and turned to look at Miss Audrey. Miss Audrey had already imagined the 2 pages of Rosal's diary and handed them to Klein. Klein picked up this week's Rosal's diary and began to read. November 3rd, Matilda is 3 months pregnant. Now, when I look at those maids from the countryside, I find them quite charming. No, I cannot lower my standards and taste. Conveniently, Countess Fleece has invited me to a private party, hee hee. November 8th. November 9th, Archbishop Aston told me that after becoming a sequence 5 Beander, the subsequent parts can be replaced by corresponding sequences from 1 or 2 other pathways, which means starting from the mid-sequence to the high sequence. I had known this knowledge for a long time. The Beander knowledge I possess now should be no less than that of a bishop. April 9th, Eternal Blazing Sun Church, Lord of Storms Church, God of Knowledge and Wisdom Church, these are things that can be utilized and are worth considering. April 13th, I attended the gathering of that ancient organization. I didn't expect them to also be members of this organization, which is truly alarming. So the second blasphemy slate is in the hands of this organization. This is my first time seeing this legendary mystical item. Indeed, it hides unimaginable secrets, hee hee. Perhaps one day, I will create a blasphemy slate of my own. No, a set, and each one must contain an ultimate secret. Great Emperor, why can't you just write down the name of this ancient organization? Klein frowned slightly, thinking with some weariness. Is being a riddle master truly a prerequisite for becoming a high-level existence? However, from this page of the diary, Klein confirmed that Emperor Rosal had indeed seen the second blasphemy slate, and even counterfeited a set of cards. In other words, the legendary deck of tarot cards exists. Klein grew increasingly curious about that mysterious organization. What kind of organization could possess the second blasphemy slate? Actually, you don't have to wait for me. Klein collected his thoughts and looked at the Hanged Man, Justice, Sun, and Eve. It is our honor. Everyone replied humbly. Audrey looked around and, finding no one speaking, lowered her head and thought for a few seconds. Aside from the unknown Miss Empress, the other Tarot Club members currently had no need to purchase formulas or materials. Taking herself as an example, although she was only a Sequence 9, she already had the formulas for Sequence 8 and Sequence 7, and there was nothing to worry about regarding materials. Currently, only Mr. Hanged Man had requested a pair of dragon-eyed sea eagle eyeballs in the last Tarot Club meeting. After some thought, Audrey spoke, "Mr. Fool, the method you previously described for selecting officials through public examinations has been approved by the King and the Prime Minister. It will soon pass through the upper and lower houses and is expected to enter the formal implementation phase early next year." Alger habitually scoffed. It seems the King and the Prime Minister still have brains. I wonder if the Loan Kingdom will have 23,000 civil servants in the future, Eve thought with a faint smile. With Benson's intelligence and diligence, he should be able to pass in both grammar and accounting, but in such a short time, Benson will find it difficult to surpass those elites who graduated from various universities. He can choose positions with less competition, Klein pondered, worrying himself sick over his older brother. After speaking, Audrey remembered another matter and immediately asked, "I've recently been in contact with some Beander circles and learned about a powerful individual named Mr. A. Mr. Fool, Mr. Hanged Man, Miss Empress, do you know his background and true identity?" Alger subtly glanced at the Empress, and after confirming she showed no signs of speaking, he took the initiative to answer the question. "Thank you very much," Audrey said cheerfully. "What do I need to pay?" Alger clasped his hands together and said in a deep voice, "I wish to entrust you with a task, using my recent answer and more remuneration as payment." "What?" Audrey asked, puzzled. Alger thought for a few seconds and then said, "I received intelligence that the great pirate Keelingos, known as Rear Admiral, the Hurricane, has secretly landed and gone to Backland, his purpose unknown. I need you to find his whereabouts. As for what happens next, you won't need to take any risks." Rear Admiral, the Hurricane. Audrey was stunned for a moment, her eyes widening slightly, a hint of excitement rising in her heart, as if she were an adventure novel protagonist about to embark on a journey. After becoming a Beander, what Audrey looked forward to most was encountering legendary figures and experiencing a wonderful, unforgettable adventure. Yes, he is a Sequence 6 of the Sailor Pathway, possesses a powerful mystical item, and is extremely cruel. Do not attempt to deal with him. At this point, Alger suddenly turned to Klein and said devoutly, "Mr. Fool, may I request the help of your blessed? I will offer remuneration that interests you." Eve's gaze shifted to Alger, and she thought, "It seems Mr. Hanged Man has some past with that pirate." "My blessed is me," Klein mused inwardly. "You may." Klein scanned the group, his gaze lingering slightly on Eve. Seeing her smile at him, he chuckled inwardly, shared blessed, understood. Alger's breathing hitched. This was good news for him, but the fool's easy agreement made Alger a little uneasy. "Thank you for your help," Alger said humbly and respectfully, lowering his head to suppress the unease in his heart. The Hanged Man placed his hands on the table, fingers interlocked in a prayer-like gesture, continuously pressing his fingers together. This is a subconscious action many people make when nervous. Is the Hanged Man nervous? Audrey noticed the Hanged Man's inadvertent small movement and subtly shifted her gaze to him, wanting to observe further, but found that the Hanged Man had already reined in his body language. It seems the Hanged Man is very good at disguising himself. What is he nervous about? Is it the fool's promise? Audrey pondered for 2 seconds, then shifted her gaze to Miss Eve, but didn't notice anything unusual. The girl imperceptibly furrowed her brow, then quickly relaxed it. Her lively emerald eyes darted around as she said, "Mr. Hanged Man, could you provide me with some information about Rear Admiral, the Hurricane, Keelangos, including his appearance, personality, and that powerful mystical item?" Audrey seriously considered for a few seconds, feeling quite confident in her ability to find people in Backland. Her father was a top wealthy nobleman, and she herself had a good reputation among the younger generation, so Audrey had many resources and connections she could use in the upper middle class of society. Moreover, the 4 Beyonders she knew each had their own circles. Furs and Sherman knew many middle-class people. Hugh, on the other hand, had a good reputation among laborers and gangs, possessing many secret channels, which were very suitable for discreet searches. And Miss Eve, as a reporter, had come into contact with a wider range of people, covering various circles including the middle class, laborers, and nobles. Of course, Alger unclasped his hands and, after a pause, continued, "This is my commission, so I naturally need to provide you with sufficient information." He has a distinctive broad chin, brown hair, and dark green eyes. His brown hair is always tied into an ancient warrior's topknot at the back of his head, Alger explained in detail. However, knowing his appearance is meaningless, because he has the ability to change his looks at will. The ability to change his looks at will. Audrey repeated curiously. What a mystical ability. A sequence 6 of the Sailor Pathway can actually change his appearance at will. No, Alger shook his head, saying with a serious expression, this is not the ability of a sequence 6 of the Sailor Pathway, but the ability of the mystical item in his hand. This is a very powerful mystical item. It is with its help that Kilangos was able to become a pirate general, but its negative effects are also very powerful. The true name of that mystical item is not known, but those who know something about it call it the creeping hunger. Kilangos must satisfy it with a living person's soul and flesh every other day, otherwise it will take its owner instead. This. Audrey's eyes widened slightly, and a feeling of disgust and discomfort involuntarily arose in her heart. What an evil item, Audrey frowned slightly, thinking silently to herself. Creeping hunger, a flicker of thought crossed Eve's eyes. Her sea-blue eyes were as deep and mysterious as the deep sea, as if one would fall into its depths with a single glance. This will be an important clue to finding Kilangos, Audrey said. No, a few homeless people disappearing in a city of millions won't attract attention, Alger reminded, then continued to explain. He was originally just a wind-blessed, possessing decent Beyonder abilities in the domains of water, wind, and weather. But later, people discovered that he could make targets go mad, enter others' dreams, summon light to purify undead, enhance himself with song, and transform into different people's appearances, almost omnipotent. Alger described in considerable detail, we suspect these are all brought about by the mystical item, the creeping hunger. Shepherd. Before Alger finished speaking, Derek blurted out the answer. This child, Klein resisted the urge to rub his forehead, complaining in his heart, he's practically begging to be taken advantage of. Shepherd. Shepherd. Audrey and Alger spoke at the same time, their gazes shifting to Derek. The difference was that one was slightly puzzled, while the other carried a hint of surprise, having likely heard of the shepherd. Seeing both their gazes turn to him, Derek immediately became nervous, explaining haltingly. After listening, both showed some surprise. Immediately, Alger fell silent, seemingly contemplating something, while Audrey continued to press for answers. What pathway is the shepherd from? What sequence? Sequence 5 of the secret supplicant pathway. Derek answered obediently. Klein sighed in his heart, thinking, he's still a child after all. These are important knowledge and intelligence that could be traded. Secret supplicant, Aurora Order, Audrey suddenly thought of Mr. A, who was suspected to be a divine messenger of the Aurora Order, and a feeling of discomfort immediately arose in her heart. She seriously considered whether she could use her accumulated contributions to ask the fool to deal with that fellow. Requesting a god to act, too luxurious. Audrey felt her contributions should be far from enough. Perhaps she could settle for a secondary option and choose one of the fool's blessed. However, the fool's blessed needs to help the hanged man. I wonder how many blessed the fool has. Mr. Fool, Silver City has already dispatched an exploration team towards the giant court. The son, Derek, spoke only when no one else was talking. It had been quite some time since Miss Eve suggested Silver City explore the giant court. Eve nodded, smiling faintly as she said, very cautious. No, Miss Eve, we didn't. Doubt lingered on Derek's lips but never came out. No, you've misunderstood, Eve chuckled softly. I'm not expressing my dissatisfaction. In the forsaken land of the gods, caution is a necessity. Derek looked up at Eve, then lowered his head again. Clearly, the elders of Silver City did not trust the fool and Miss Eve, but they were willing to bet on them. Derek couldn't see the deeper implications, but he knew that the elders of Silver City didn't trust the fool and Miss Eve. In fact, he didn't even know if the fool and Miss Eve could be trusted, but he simply believed them. Perhaps it was because they had no other choice, or perhaps it was because they were tired of the endless darkness, and even a fleeting glimmer of light was something they wanted to grasp tightly. Chapter 141, The Oil Painting. Dense gray fog permeated the ancient palace, and blurred figures around the bronze long table were hidden behind the mist. Son, Derek lowered his head, then raised it a few seconds later, looking at Empress opposite him. He opened his mouth and said somewhat stammeringly, "Thank you very much for your understanding, Miss Empress." Eve smiled slightly, like a benevolent elder, but the gray fog obscured her face and expression, revealing only mystery and beauty to the Tarot Club members. Klein swept his gaze around, tapping his finger on the table. Seeing that everyone's attention had been drawn, he solemnly announced the end of the meeting. "Your will is our desire." The Tarot Club members rose and bowed. Klein severed their connections, and in an instant, only he and Eve remained above Saphira Castle. He leaned back, just about to simulate the feeling of falling to leave Saphira Castle, when he heard Eve's voice. "Creeping hunger," Eve murmured, then turned to Klein and smiled. "If it's the creeping hunger, you can ask Azek for help." Klein opened his eyes, pressed lightly on the armrests with both hands, sat up, and turned to look at Eve, as this mystical item related to Mr. Azek's past. Eve nodded. "Good things really come in pairs, couldn't find any before, now they're coming one after another." Klein's eyes lit up as he thought to himself. Just as he was about to agree, he suddenly realized another problem. "Will Mr. Azek be in danger?" Klein asked with a slight frown, a little worried. He wasn't sure how much Mr. Azek's abilities had recovered. "Don't underestimate an angel," Eve said with a smile. "Even if they lose their abilities, an angel cannot be killed by a sequence 6 Beander." "No, I'm not referring to death, although death is included in the danger I spoke of." Klein paused, then shook his head. "Does only death count as danger for an angel?" "Not necessarily." Eve crossed her hands under her chin, her sea-blue eyes gazing forward, seemingly piercing through the ancient gray fog. "It's just that more often, it's worse than death." Klein fell silent. He knew that sometimes in the Beander world, dying directly was a kind of luck. Angels, as high-level existences, possessed power beyond the reach of ordinary Beanders, but they also faced greater dangers. Eve suddenly withdrew her hands, leaned back, and chuckled. "Don't worry, I'll go too." She teased, "After all, I am your dependence." Klein froze, slowly reached up to support his forehead, his facial muscles stiff, the awkwardness almost piercing through the gray fog. "I should think about an excuse to get Mr. Azek involved in this." He closed his eyes and thought silently to himself. Eve blinked, a hint of a smile flashing in her eyes, and left Saphira Castle. In the dark bedroom, the tightly closed curtains blocked out the sunlight, and the off-white thin blanket on the neatly made bed was messily piled up. She casually lay down on the bed, pulled a corner of the thin blanket over her stomach, and slowly closed her eyes. A few seconds later, the girl's long, thick eyelashes fluttered twice like butterfly wings, and her tightly closed eyes opened. Eve lay on the bed, her eyes staring blankly at the ceiling. After a long while, she slowly got up. She estimated Klein's arrival time and used spirit world travel to reach the vicinity of Hoi University. The clear river flowed quietly. There were no more students rowing on the river. The trees on both sides of the river curled their leaves, seemingly unbearable from the scorching sun, but they still cast a shadow, providing coolness for people. Klein felt his spirituality suddenly touched, and when he looked back, he found Eve standing behind him. What a convenient ability, Klein praised in his heart, thinking with a hint of envy. Not only convenient but also saves a lot on cab fares. "Let's go." The girl walked beside Klein, raised her chin, and gestured to him. Klein replied, taking the lead to show the way. Hoi University was not small. The two walked a long way before they saw Azek. "Mr. Azek, Klein specifically scanned the office upon entering, confirming that only Mr. Azek was present before confidently stepping inside. I apologize for the abrupt interruption, but we have some important matters that we need to inform you of immediately. Eve followed closely behind Klein into the room, locking the door behind her as she entered. Azek's eyes showed a hint of surprise, but more of his usual gentleness remained. He immediately stood up, inviting Klein and Eve to sit down, and then sat opposite them himself, ready to listen to their news. Mr. Azek, we've found clues about your past, Klein said with a serious expression. Although he had already guessed this possible outcome, when it was actually spoken by Klein, Azek couldn't help but feel excited, and his usually world-weary eyes lost their usual composure. What clues? He asked impatiently. Klein deliberated for 2 seconds, then organized his words and said, I recently accepted a commission to eliminate a wraith in an abandoned ancient castle outside Ramad town. Ramad. Azek murmured the name, his brows slightly furrowed. Klein observed Azek's expression, and seeing that the name, Ramad, had affected Mr. Azek, he immediately continued, during the process of eliminating the wraith, we discovered some things, so we went to the town for a more in-depth investigation. A townsman claimed to possess a portrait of the first Baron Ramad and tried to sell it to me. I examined this oil painting and found that the person in the portrait, apart from the hairstyle, had facial features very similar to yours, Mr. Azek. Even the black mole below the ear was in the same position and of the same size. Under my interrogation, the townsman confessed that the oil painting was a work from over 40 years ago, but the subject it imitated indeed came from the abandoned ancient castle. It was indeed an ancient portrait unearthed from there. You know, people like us with unique abilities all possess preliminary lie detection skills, and this skill told me that the townsman was not lying. Azek leaned forward, listening quietly, remaining silent even after Klein finished speaking. After a while, Azek slowly exhaled and said, I haven't remembered anything. Perhaps I should go and see that ancient castle. Can you take me there? Of course. Klein nodded and looked at Eve. Eve, who had been silent all along, stood up, holding Klein's shoulder with one hand and Azek's shoulder with the other. Azek looked at Eve with some confusion, then suddenly found that the world had changed. All the colors deepened, twisting and overflowing from their original positions. Eve took the two of them to Ramad town, and before leaving, she unlocked the office door that she had locked. The rich colors gradually returned to normal, and in an instant, Azek found himself in another place. A modeled ancient castle stood before them, its outer walls already collapsed. Green plants climbed over the still-standing walls, and time had left many traces on the castle. Here, Azek unconsciously took 2 steps forward, stopping to gaze at the ancient castle, his eyes sometimes deep, sometimes hazy, as if wandering between reality and dreams. Suddenly, Azek groaned, unconsciously bending down and covering his forehead with his hand. His facial muscles twisted, and veins bulged on his arms. What's wrong with Mr. Azek? Klein dared not use his spirit vision, only asking Miss Eve with concern. Part of his memory has returned, Miss Eve said, her arms crossed, watching Azek in front of her, her sea-blue eyes deep and profound. This is the consequence of forcibly awakening memories, it's not serious. Hearing this, Klein felt relieved, but his eyes remained fixed on Mr. Azek. Azek's expression was pained, but he slowly straightened up, lowered the hand covering his forehead, and pointed at the ancient castle, speaking as if in a trance. I've seen this ancient castle in my dreams. Back then, it was still complete, with sturdy outer walls and towering spires. I remember that was the stable, and that was the well. I remember there was a training ground there. My child, he was a boy, only 7 or 8 years old, and he loved running around dragging a broadsword taller than him, saying he wanted to be a knight someday. My wife always complained that the castle was too dark. She loved the sun, loved the feeling of warmth. Azek stopped his babbling and walked towards the main door, showing no sign of waiting for Klein and Miss Eve. Mr. Azek's current state is a bit off, Klein thought, frowning slightly. Are these all consequences of forcibly awakening memories? But since old sister said it's not serious, then it shouldn't be serious. She never lies about such things. Miss Eve stepped forward, following Azek into the ancient castle. Seeing this, Klein immediately gripped his cane and followed. Without needing anyone to lead the way, Azek skillfully found the mechanism and opened the secret door leading to the basement. The three descended the stairs and arrived at a room filled with coffins. Unlike before, the coffins were now closed. Klein guessed Fry must have done it. It was his professional ethics as a corpse collector. Under the gaze of Miss Eve and Klein, Azek slowly walked to a coffin and pushed open a small gap. Miss Eve's gaze was fixed on the coffin. As the coffin lid slowly opened, the scene inside gradually revealed itself to her. He stared at the headless skeleton in the coffin for a long time, then suddenly let out a mournful cry. Thump, thump, thump. Dull footsteps echoed in the room. Azek retreated a few steps, his heart heavy, his steps faltering. Klein wanted to go forward and support him, but before he could get close, Azek stumbled and fell, sliding down against the wall. He sat slumped, covering his face with both hands, and the surrounding environment momentarily seemed to grow darker. Miss Eve took 2 steps forward, stood before Azek, bent down, and placed her hand on his shoulder. In an instant, the room returned to normal. Is this considered an angel-level battle? Klein secretly breathed a sigh of relief, using self-mockery to calm his nervous heart. The person who took your child's skull is already dead, Miss Eve said. Both Azek and Klein were stunned. Klein looked at Miss Eve, expressing his confusion with his eyes. You did it. Miss Eve shook her head and said, I didn't do it, but he did die in front of me. Azek raised his head and looked at Miss Eve, supporting himself against the wall with his right hand, and slowly stood up. I apologize for my gaffe, Azek said sincerely. Could you tell me the specific circumstances? He was scared to death, Miss Eve replied. Klein instantly felt his scalp tingle, his eyes widened slightly, and he thought uncomfortably, if he didn't have heart disease, that's a truly bizarre way to die. He must have seen something terrifying before he died to be scared to death. But your child's skull cannot be retrieved, Miss Eve continued. Azek's expression darkened. No one would be happy to know that their child's skull was taken after death. He looked back at the coffin in the center of the room, an uncontrollable sorrow welling up. Azek walked forward, placed his hands on the coffin lid, and slowly but firmly closed the coffin. I regret that I cannot personally exact revenge, Azek said with a bitter smile. But I am also glad to hear of his death. After a while, he turned around, perhaps having adjusted his mood, or perhaps not. He said to Klein, I sense the power that made your destiny discordant here. The power that made my destiny discordant. In an instant, Klein understood the truth of the matter, connecting the scattered facts. So, the Beander characteristic within Mei Gao Oc came from Mr. Azek's child. Mei Gao Oc had not yet returned to Tingnan. Her condition required long-term isolation and observation. However, Mei Gao Oc's family was still in Tingnan and was also a key observation target. The captain would receive some news from the Holy Cathedral. Ordinary people cannot conceive a spawn of evil god, so that fellow took Mr. Azek's child's skull, turning Mei Gao Oc into a Beander. That's why Mei Gao Oc's mental state was so poor, not only because of the influence of the spawn of evil god, but also because she did not consume a low-sequence potion, skipping the low sequences and directly consuming a mid-sequence Beander characteristic. After Azek finished speaking, he turned to Miss Eve, gazing at her for a long time. Finally, he curled his lips, his tone a mix of ease and heaviness. Miss Eve, we really did know each other before. In my memory, you were this child's history teacher, Azek said, stroking the coffin, his expression gentle, like a loving elder. But you always liked to tell him some unrecorded historical stories. It was very interesting, and my wife liked it too. She would listen in during lessons under the guise of supervision. Azek reminisced, a hint of nostalgia and tenderness in his eyes. History teacher, flower shop owner, he sighed. Perhaps in the future, I will discover more of your identities. Klein's gaze also followed Azek to Miss Eve. Miss Eve shrugged, unfazed by their stares, and said, perhaps. Perhaps I truly am someone who has lived for a very, very long time, and Miss Eve is as well. Isaac's voice was low, as if he was suppressing himself. I must have paid some price to have such a long lifespan, surviving from the end of the fourth epoch until now. That's not wrong to say, Miss Eve thought to herself. Mr. Isaac, are you really not considering whether you still fall within the category of human? Klein muttered in his heart. Chapter 143, Choices. Klein looked towards Isaac, but the darkness obstructed his vision, making Isaac seem to merge into the darkness in Klein's eyes. He frowned slightly. Mr. Isaac's figure now reminded Klein of his own divinations. Baron Ramad I, university history lecturer, those indistinct dark figures, could they all be Mr. Isaac? Klein watched even Isaac thoughtfully. Mr. Isaac, I have a conjecture about your situation. What conjecture? I believe your forgetting is cyclical. Perhaps every few decades, you die once, clearing your previous memories, and then, after a certain period, you awaken from a dark slumber to begin a new life. Only this can explain your different dreams, which are events you encountered in your different lives. Klein described his speculation, and then added, Mr. Isaac, do you remember the result of my divination? Perhaps those dark figures are all you. They are all me. Isaac murmured, his gaze deep as he looked forward, as if trying to see through the ancient, mottled wall to his forgotten past. After a while, he seemed to come back to his senses and mumbled, your conjecture aligns with some of the memories I recovered after being stimulated. Isaac paused, then turned his gaze to Eve, his eyes complex. Miss Eve, I don't know the reason you didn't tell me the truth. But I am very grateful that you are willing to search for memories with me. I look forward to the day you tell me the truth. Eve looked up, her sea blue eyes as deep and profound as the deep sea. Even if a raging storm were to rise, it would be so tiny in comparison to the ocean, let alone small waves. Her gaze swept over Isaac and Klein, finally resting on Isaac. The dark environment prevented Isaac from seeing the girl's expression. It will arrive soon, she said. That day will arrive soon. Isaac's eyes widened slightly, a little surprised. He tightly closed his eyes, as if suppressing his emotions, but opened them a second later and said, I am very curious what kind of choice will be presented to me on that day. Eve did not answer. Her sea blue eyes gazed at him, points of curiosity like stars adorning the ocean, conveying the answer to Isaac with her eyes. She was also curious, but Isaac could not know what she was curious about. Klein looked at the two people in front of him, tightly gripping the cane in his hand, his mouth pressed down. He still had a conjecture he hadn't voiced. Mr. Isaac's cycle of amnesia might have been orchestrated by Eve or her allies. But this conjecture certainly couldn't be spoken, at least not now. Klein glanced at the two of them, deliberating what to say to ease the gradually chilling atmosphere. Mr. Isaac, perhaps you don't need to leave Tingen to pursue your lost past. You will gradually remember. Why? Isaac withdrew his gaze from Eve and turned to look at his student. Your memories haven't been completely lost. The fact that some were awakened by stimulation today is proof. Moreover, Mr. Isaac, do you remember waking up in Backland and realizing you had forgotten your past? When you woke up confused from your dream, you had new identification and sufficient money, as well as a way of appearing that didn't alarm others. It all seemed pre-arranged, allowing you to quickly integrate into society. Klein tapped his silver inlaid cane and said with a slight smile, it's very possible that your past self knew you would lose your memory and made arrangements in advance. It's also possible that the mastermind behind the scenes arranged it for you. Klein silently added a guess in his heart. If that's truly the case, then the parents I've been searching for might be my past self. Isaac said with a sigh, acknowledging Klein's guess. He turned his head, looking at Eve with complex eyes, and said, Miss Eve, let's go back. Regardless, I am still very grateful for your help in searching for my memories. No matter what the final truth is, this gratitude will not change. Isaac paused, then continued with a slight smile. Moreover, my memories tell me that you bear no ill will towards me. Eve nodded, agreeing, your memories are very accurate. I indeed bear no ill will towards you. May I ask Miss Eve a question? Isaac asked politely. The help Eve gave him would not disappear because of her concealment, and he still chose to trust Eve. You may. Eve nodded. Did Miss Eve participate in all of my cycles? No. Eve shook her head. After the initial novelty wore off, Eve did not specifically participate in Azek's cycles, appearing less and less in his reincarnations, and there were even a few cycles where she was not present at all. Is that so? Azek nodded. There was too much unknown now, and he didn't even know whether this situation should be a cause for joy or sorrow. He sighed silently and said, I have no more questions. Then I will send you back. Eve placed one hand on Azek's shoulder and the other on Klein's shoulder, taking them back to Hoi University. After bidding farewell to Azek, she sent Klein home. After returning home, Klein placed his cane by the desk, lowered his voice, and asked, How soon is soon? The soundproofing at number 2 Narcissus Street was 10 times better than the Moretti family's previous apartment, but Klein was still worried about Bella finding out. With a maid, although he no longer had to buy groceries, cook, or clean himself, it brought Klein many inconveniences in terms of mysticism. For example, he used to experiment with some rituals when Benson and Melissa were not around, but now, except for holidays and trips to buy groceries, Bella would stay in the Moretti home for long periods. To avoid being discovered, Klein had to give up experimenting at home. And this inconvenience was something he certainly couldn't discuss with Benson to resolve. Eve thought for a moment, then extended both hands, showing one finger on her right hand and 2 fingers on her left, and said, A year or 2, perhaps. A year or 2. Klein frowned. He wasn't sure what he could grow into in such a short time. Will Mr. Azek be in danger? Klein asked with some concern. That depends on his choice. Eve withdrew her hand and said. Klein's brows furrowed deeper, and a sense of urgency involuntarily grew in his heart. Don't worry, Eve patted Klein's back and said, Trust your Mr. Azek. Do you think Mr. Azek will make the correct choice? Chapter 144 Telepathos. Correct. A flicker of thought crossed Miss Eve's eyes, and she smiled, patting Klein's back. If it's him, he should be able to make a choice that satisfies everyone. Provided it's him, Miss Eve silently added in her heart. Does everyone include Mr. Azek? Klein cautiously asked. As a keyboard warrior in his previous life, he had seen many word games online. Isn't Azek a person? Miss Eve turned her head and asked with an innocent expression. You'd better not be insulting Mr. Azek, Klein thought silently. Strictly speaking, no, he isn't, Klein said with a serious expression, trying to look like a scholar discussing an academic problem. Strictly speaking, Miss Eve wrapped an arm around Klein's neck, wiggling a finger in front of his eyes. Among everyone, only you are currently a person. Klein reached out and removed Miss Eve's arm from his neck, unable to resist asking the question he had long hidden in his heart, is becoming a Riddler a prerequisite for becoming a high-level existence? Of course not. This time, Miss Eve answered quite readily. Klein rolled his eyes at Miss Eve. With no one else around, he didn't need to maintain his gentlemanly demeanor. He didn't pursue the question about Mr. Azek, having already gotten the answer he wanted. Klein didn't hear the other trap in the words, he only felt a huge weight lift from his heart, instantly feeling light. His tense nerves relaxed, and Klein immediately remembered something. He had forgotten to tell Mr. Azek about Kilangos. Indeed, staying up late is bad for your health. I'm about to become a captain, Klein thought sadly, turning to face the full-length mirror, carefully examining his hair. Only after confirming his hairline was temporarily safe did he relax. I should write to Mr. Azek, Klein pondered, and Leonard. Leonard is in Backland now. I can write a subtle hint to him, to see if the Nighthawks in Backland can increase their vigilance. Empress Borough, Backland. In a room filled with chemical instruments, a beautiful young lady threw various materials into the ritual in front of her. 5 grams of chestnut bud spores, 8 grams of dragon's tooth grass powder, 3 petals of pure white elf flower, 100 milliliters of pure water. Audrey chanted silently while adding the Beander ingredients. When the main Beander ingredients, A complete pituitary gland from an adult 7-colored lizard dragon and the spinal fluid of a Folsman rabbit were added to the pot. The Beander potion immediately began to boil. Audrey instantly tensed up, staring intently at the liquid in the pot. A few seconds later, the liquid calmed down. The Beander potion was complete. Audrey's heart swelled with joy, and she immediately ladled the Beander potion into a glass bottle. The young lady delightedly looked at the liquid in the glass bottle, which resembled melted fragments of sunlight. She took a deep breath and drank it all. The risk of low sequence advancement was not great, and Audrey's advancement went smoothly. Before long, she opened her eyes. I can directly see the target's aura and emotional colors, read shallow thoughts, and even initially simulate others' thinking. This is so cool. Audrey's eyes sparkled as she assimilated her new abilities. Especially the ability to read shallow thoughts. This was true telepathy, even if only superficial. She couldn't wait to test her new abilities and, incidentally, find a way to act. Audrey opened the door and saw Susie waiting outside. She bent down, stroked her head, and praised, "Susie, you're amazing." "Woof," Susie responded. Audrey looked at Susie in front of her and, on a whim, tried out telepathy on her. "Biscuits, woof." "Susie wants biscuits." Audrey chuckled, lifted her skirt, walked to the cabinet, and took out some pet biscuits. "These are your reward, Susie." "Woof." Susie barked happily. After taking out Susie's portion, Audrey put the bag of pet biscuits back and began to recall her recent attempt. There were no signs of the Beander potion being digested. It seems merely relying on telepathy isn't enough. Audrey pondered. Telepathis, the core of acting must be on. Telepathy. Audrey thought for a while, but even after Susie finished her biscuits, she hadn't figured anything out. However, she wasn't discouraged. After all, this was just a small attempt. "It's okay, Susie." Audrey rubbed Susie's head. "We'll find it." "Woof." Susie barked, somewhat confused. "Where's Rui?" Audrey asked, puzzled. Before she entered the chemical laboratory, she had seen Susie carrying a fluffy black ball on her back. Rui was visiting Susie less and less often. Audrey asked with some concern, "Did you two have a disagreement?" "No," Susie replied. Rui doesn't want to sunbathe with me. She's probably under a cabinet now, woof." Despite possessing considerable intelligence, Beander pets still maintained their original habits. Rui loved small, dark places. However, what Audrey didn't quite understand was Rui's aversion to sunlight. The cats kept by the ladies and young misses she knew didn't dislike sunlight. Audrey guessed this must be Rui's personality. Audrey patted the golden retriever's head and said, "Let's go look for her together." She wanted to investigate Miss Eve's identity through Rui. Of course, she couldn't miss this opportunity. Duke Hall's villa was unusually large, and finding a cat was no easy task. Fortunately, Audrey hadn't searched for long before Rui came out on her own. As Susie expected, Rui had indeed burrowed under a cabinet again. The maids employed by the Hall family would clean every corner of Hall Villa, naturally including under the cabinets, but Rui still habitually shook her body. She walked gracefully to the human and the dog, then, with nimble steps, jumped onto Susie's back and curled into a ball. Rui, do you want to have afternoon tea in my room?" Audrey asked. "I'll draw the curtains." Rui nodded in agreement. Her nods were always very pronounced, otherwise, no one would notice. Audrey's eyes sparkled with a mix of anticipation and nervousness as she entered the room. Upon entering the room, Audrey took out the pet biscuits she kept there. She had specially prepared Rui's pet biscuits and poured some for her. Then she took out Susie's pet biscuits and poured some, but Susie's portion was much smaller than Rui's. "Susie," Audrey stroked her head and said, "you've already had one serving. If you eat another, you won't be able to eat dinner." In fact, Susie didn't feel any dissatisfaction. She actually felt like she had gotten a good deal. Chapter 145, Powerful Divine Connections. Audrey withdrew her hand and sat in her chair, looking at the cat and dog in front of her. Although it was an afternoon tea, Audrey didn't have her own refreshments, but she didn't mind. Audrey crossed her hands on her lap, maintaining a graceful posture, and began to chat with a smile. She started by talking to Susie, then naturally shifted the topic to Susie herself, leading the conversation to her past with Susie. When the time was right, Audrey asked, as if purely curious, "Susie, how did you meet Miss Eve?" "She picked me up in the snow." Susie swallowed the biscuit in her mouth and looked up as she spoke. "Oh, Susie used to be." Audrey covered her mouth in surprise, her eyes widening slightly. Susie's dignified and elegant demeanor didn't at all resemble a stray cat. A stray cat, Susie naturally finished Audrey's unspoken sentence. She appeared natural and open, as if she didn't care at all. "That's a very distant memory. At that time, I was just an ordinary cat. Because I accidentally scratched a young master, my former owner abandoned me." Audrey couldn't help but glance at Susie's paws. Susie always kept her nails meticulously trimmed. It seems she doesn't completely not care. Audrey thought silently to herself. Susie noticed Audrey's gaze but didn't offer any explanation. She truly didn't care now, it was just a habit formed over many years. "I'm sorry for making you recall those things," Audrey said with a hint of self-reproach. Susie shook her head. "I already came to terms with it a very, very long time ago." Audrey scurried to the cabinet, took out Susie's pet biscuits, and poured some into Susie's bowl. The young girl sat with her hands clasped on her lap, her gaze gentle as she looked at the black cat in front of her. That's enough for today." "No. 7 Pin Street, Backland." Leonard rubbed his forehead, easing the confusion of just waking up. His usual dressing style highlighted his romantic poet's temperament. After casually tidying his collar, Leonard prepared to head to the church for special training. "A letter." An aged voice suddenly echoed in his mind. Leonard paused, his somewhat muddled brain slowly starting to function normally, receiving information from Pales. "A letter? What letter?" Leonard asked, puzzled. "A letter from your colleague," Pales replied, "it's in the mailbox." Leonard rubbed his head, turned around, and jogged to the mailbox, where he indeed saw a letter lying inside. He reached in and took out the letter, seeing the signature, Klein Moretti, on the envelope. From Klein. Leonard's eyes lit up. After 2 seconds of thought, he turned and went back into the house, took out a small knife, and opened the envelope. There was still a good amount of time before the special training began, so Leonard had ample time to read the letter, and Klein's letter might contain some important information. Leonard unfolded the letter and began to read it word by word. After finishing the letter, Leonard only wanted to say that Klein was truly a standard Loan gentleman in some respects. He read it again, his gaze finally resting on, "I heard that a pirate general named Keelangos has arrived in Backland. This pirate general is very vicious. I hope you will be careful in all things. If you encounter him, please be sure to stay away and do not put yourself in danger." Leonard, being in Backland, hadn't even heard such a rumor, which showed that Klein's herd was likely not the kind of herd from hearsay. "Is Klein hoping I'll pay attention to this pirate general?" Leonard asked, finding it more and more probable the more he thought about it. "Hey," Pales sneered, "didn't you see that your colleague told you to stay away from him?" Leonard glanced at the word "away" on the letter, then quickly averted his gaze. "He probably hopes the Nighthawks will be aware of this matter," Pales analyzed. "The purpose of this pirate general coming to Backland is unknown. Exposing him to official beyonders will reduce the potential risks he might cause." "So that's it." Leonard instantly understood and immediately asked, "Old man, do you have a way to find him?" Klein hadn't provided Keelangos's location or clues in the letter. "No," Pales said grumpily, "and your colleague probably doesn't either. You just need to find a way to make the Nighthawks aware of this. If it weren't for the Beander characteristic Eve gave him, he wouldn't even be able to monitor Hangel now." Tingnan. Azek read the letter from his student with a serious expression and placed it on his desk. Creeping hunger. Azek closed his eyes, vaguely feeling that the name sounded familiar. It seemed this item was indeed related to his past. But he didn't recall any memories, so it seemed he would need to see it in person. His fingertips gently tapped the paper, again and again, the sound heavy, as if it were music tapping on the soul. Isaac slowly opened his eyes and began to write a reply to Klein, telling him that he would go and see. He blew the copper whistle, summoned the white bone messenger, and handed both the letter and the copper whistle to him. The copper whistle was something he had carried since waking up in Backland. It could summon a white bone messenger. After recovering some memories, Isaac knew that there was more than one such white bone messenger, but he didn't know the exact number. He gave the copper whistle to the white bone messenger, for the messenger to deliver to Klein, so that Klein could contact him even after he left Tingen. No. 2 Narcissus Street. Klein, who was sitting on the sofa reading the newspaper, suddenly felt his spirituality stir, followed by a chill. Bella put down the cloth in her hand with some confusion, got up, and closed the window, but the chilling sensation still didn't disappear. Klein, who had activated his spirit vision, knew the reason very clearly. A huge white bone had appeared in their house. The giant white bone made the entire room seem much smaller. Klein's hand, holding the newspaper, tightened slightly. He didn't know why this huge white bone had appeared here. He forced himself not to look at it, observing the white bone giant out of the corner of his eye, hoping that this white bone giant had just lost its way. Bang! Klein saw out of the corner of his eye that the white bone giant threw something at him, and then disappeared. The chilling sensation in the room vanished. Klein stealthily looked down. It was a letter and a copper whistle. The signature on the letter was, Isaac Eggers. While observing Bella out of the corner of his eye, he quietly bent down and picked up the letter and the copper whistle. After getting them, Klein immediately hid the letter and the copper whistle in his pocket, placed the newspaper on the table, and walked back to his room as usual. Back in his room, Klein immediately locked the door, took out the letter and the copper whistle, and placed them on his desk. Just in case, he took out his pendulum to determine if there was any danger. There is no danger in opening the envelope. Quote. There is no danger in opening the envelope. Looking at the pendulum rotating clockwise, Klein breathed a sigh of relief and continued his divination. There is no danger in reading the letter. Quote. There is no danger in reading the letter. Only after repeated confirmation did Klein finally relax, and he used a small knife to open the envelope. Mr. Isaac agreed. Copper whistle, summon messenger. Klein put down the letter and looked at the copper whistle on the desk. Now, he had 2 angel messengers. He should be the Beyander of Sequence 8 with the most powerful divine connections in this world. Chapter 146, High Sequence Cat. Backland, Sherwood Borough, inside a small apartment. Furs tightly gripped a small mirror, holding a pen and meticulously drawing the pattern Sherman had given her onto the mirror's surface. Meanwhile, Zio was writing a letter. This was a contact method for a friendly high-sequence Beyander that Sherman had given them. Because of the danger of this matter and her fiancé, Sherman, if exposed to Keelangos, couldn't hide directly like Furs and Zio, and it might even involve Jessica. So, she didn't participate in their actions. But before the 2 of them started investigating, she gave them this method, which was said to connect them to a very friendly high-sequence Beyander. Furs took a deep breath, took the envelope from Zio's hand, placed the letter and the mirror into a cabinet, and slowly closed the cabinet door. After doing all this, Furs returned to the living room as if nothing had happened, but her rapidly beating heart and the subtle sweat on her palms betrayed her true feelings. A few minutes later, Furs eagerly opened the cabinet door. The letter had disappeared, replaced by a blank piece of paper. Furs picked up the white paper and saw the large words, "I will provide you with shelter," written on it. The writing was very large, taking up the entire page with less than 10 characters, and it was crooked, with lines that seemed to dance up and down as if written by a beginner. How strange, Furs frowned, looking at the writing on the paper, and handed the reply to Zio. Evidently, Zio also noticed this peculiar issue. She frowned, wanting to consult Sherman, but worried about implicating her. Regardless, a high-sequence Beyander is willing to provide us with shelter, so our safety is assured. Although this high-sequence meander is a bit strange, Zhou put down the letter and said to Furs. Furs nodded in agreement. Zhou and Furs had been constantly on edge, not only avoiding Kilangos's pursuit but also evading the official beyonders. Only at this moment did they finally relax a little. I never expected Sherman to have a high-sequence meander's contact information. Zhou scratched her head, a hint of envy in her tone. Although I don't know what their relationship is, the powerful meander is willing to shelter us for Sherman, so their relationship must be very good. It's truly enviable. They knew a bit about Sherman's situation. Unlike them, Sherman entered the meander world under the guidance of a high-sequence meander and even became his student. This starting point was already enviable enough. Why can't I have my own fortuitous encounter? Furs leaned closer to Zhou, frowning slightly, and said, in the meander world, fortuitous encounters often represent danger. Zhou lowered her head and said dazedly, I know, it's just, that way I could retrieve my family's things a bit sooner. I haven't seen my younger brother in a year. Furs drew a triangle on her chest and comforted her, steam be above, you will surely achieve your wish. Zhou straightened up, regaining her usual dignity. She drew a crimson moon on her chest, may the goddess bless me. May the goddess bless you. A female voice suddenly intruded between the two, startling Furs and Zhou. The two looked in the direction of the voice and saw a black cat sitting on their cabinet. The black cat elegantly licked its paw, groomed its ear, then shook its body and jumped down from the cabinet. The moment the black cat jumped down, Zhou immediately reached out to shield Furs behind her, taking 2 steps back with her. The apartment windows and door were locked. How could a black cat suddenly run in? You're the ones who sought me out, yet now you're so wary. Rui stretched, saying casually, without any hint of displeasure in her tone. You are, Furs's throat bobbed, and she said incredulously, that high-sequence meander. Rui nodded. This situation immediately astonished the two, that high-sequence meander was actually a cat. A high-sequence meander cat, it really makes one feel inferior to a cat, Furs mumbled inwardly, suddenly realizing that a magical black cat would be perfect to write into a novel. I have material for my next book, Furs rejoiced inwardly, not expecting such an unexpected gain. You can call me Rui said. My name is Zhou Derecha, and this is Furs Wall. Zhou hadn't expected such a situation. No wonder the writing was so strange. It was already miraculous that it could write at all, and, Zhou glanced at Rui's paws. There were no pens designed for cats in this world. Furs. The author Furs? Rui asked. Yes. Furs immediately replied, thinking with some surprise, this high-sequence meander wouldn't be my reader, would he? My reader is a cat. No, it should be that my reader is a high-sequence cat, but it's still so strange. My owner is your reader, Rui said. I want an autograph, if that's possible. Owner. What kind of owner could raise a high-sequence cat? Furs suddenly felt a wave of dizziness, her mouth moving faster than her brain, and she said giddily, does your owner still need a pet? Zhou hadn't yet recovered from the shock of, owner, when she was once again stunned by Furs's outrageous statement. Rui and Zhou's gazes towards Furs immediately changed. Zhou even quietly shuffled sideways, moving away from Furs. No. The looks from both the person and the cat immediately made Furs react, and she quickly denied, I was just joking. She cleared her throat twice and changed the subject, saying, yes, of course. I don't have a book right now. Let's do the signing after the Kilangos incident is over, Rui said. Consider it the price for me providing you with shelter. Furs immediately breathed a sigh of relief, but upon hearing the latter half, her heart instantly leapt up again. How can this? The price is truly disproportionate. But you also can't afford the normal price for a demigod to act, Rui said mercilessly. Furs's face immediately flushed red. What Rui said was indeed true. We can pay in installments, Furs stammered, but even as she said it, she knew that even with installments, it would be difficult for them to pay it back. Although it's difficult for us to come up with enough compensation, Zhou deliberated her words and said, "We still hope to repay as much as possible." The death threat of Qilangos hanging over them was still vivid. If this incident hadn't directly threatened their lives, they wouldn't have asked a high-sequence Beander to intervene. First, they had to save their lives. As for everything else, it could only be prioritized later. "You obtained my contact method from Sherman." Rui stood up, walked elegantly to their feet, raised her head, and her brown eyes gazed at them. "Since that's the case, I'll give you a discount. Do 3 things for me unconditionally, and consider it payment for my bodyguard services these past few days. How does that sound? Don't worry, I won't make you do anything harmful to society, nor will I send you to your deaths, but during the days I act as your bodyguard, you will be responsible for my food, clothing, and accommodation." Zhou and Furs hesitated for a moment, but finally nodded in agreement. The things 2 low-sequence Beyonders could do were limited, and Rui could also do what they could. This discount was truly too great, but they had nothing else to offer. Klein received a reply from Azek, and soon after, he received a reply from Leonard. He was trying to subtly hint at Qilangos's existence to the Nighthawks, and according to him, it had already shown some results. As for the specifics, Klein didn't know. After some time, Klein once again received a letter from Leonard. Someone had anonymously reported a murder to the police and subtly indicated in the report that Qilangos was the murderer. Because the scene was too bizarre, it was handed over to the punishers by the police, and Qilangos might soon face a citywide manhunt. He had already learned this information at the last Tarot Club meeting. Klein put down the letter and rubbed his temples. After the Qilangos incident was over, he should also leave. Klein lowered his hand, staring blankly at the ceiling, his chest rising and falling as he suppressed the emotions in his heart. Thump, thump, thump. A knock on the door suddenly sounded, followed by a familiar, clear female voice from outside the door. Klein. Klein paused, then quickly came to his senses and immediately put the letter into the drawer, pressing it down with books. Then he walked to the door and opened it. Melissa was standing outside the door, her right hand suspended in midair, maintaining the knocking gesture, and her left hand hanging by her side, seemingly holding a metal object. "What's wrong, Melissa?" Klein asked. Melissa withdrew her hand that was suspended in midair, extended her left hand, and opened her 5 fingers. A metal object with rectangular limbs lay quietly on the girl's palm. "It's for you. I bought new materials," Melissa said, simultaneously extending her hand towards Klein. "A very nice doll," Klein said tentatively. He remembered that the last time Melissa made a doll, so this time, remaking it should still be a doll. Seeing the corners of Melissa's mouth unconsciously turn up, Klein knew he had guessed correctly. Klein took Melissa's metal doll and thought of Eve's ugly doll, suddenly feeling that Melissa and Eve had a strong fate to be sisters. "I hope they can successfully become sisters," Klein prayed in his heart. Chapter 147, Qilangos. In Baklan's Empress Borough, a grand ball was underway. In the ballroom, gentlemen would occasionally approach ladies and young women to invite them to dance. After the opening dance, Audrey walked down the corridor towards the dining hall. "How boring, yet I can't not attend," Audrey thought idly, looking down at her toes. Just then, the girl's peripheral vision caught sight of an approaching figure. She immediately raised her head, straightened her back, and once again became the elegant and beautiful Miss Hall, speaking with impeccable etiquette and a smile. "Hello, Baron Grimir." "Hello, Miss Hall, you are the most dazzling diamond in this ball." After a few polite and formal exchanges, the two parted ways. Audrey continued towards the dining hall, but stopped abruptly after a few steps. "Baron Grimir tonight seems different from usual," Audrey thought with a frown, recalling every move Baron Grimir had just made. In the past, when he saw a lady or madam of higher status and greater beauty, his gaze would shift away, not daring to look directly, and then he would constantly sneak glances, but today, he seemed very confident. And the perfume. The more Audrey thought about it, the more she felt something was wrong. This was definitely not Baron Grimir. Then who was he? Qilangos. The name immediately surfaced in Audrey's mind. She remembered that Mr. Hanged Man had said Kilangos possessed the ability to change his appearance. Thinking of this possibility, Audrey's heart involuntarily tightened, filled with nervousness and panic. If it really is Kilangos, what does he want to do? No, I must warn Father. Audrey quickened her pace, found Earl Hall, who was conversing with the chief secretary of the cabinet and others, led him away from the crowd, and quietly told him her conjecture. Earl Hall listened quietly, his expression becoming unusually solemn. He patiently comforted his panicked daughter and told her to find her mother. On her way to the lounge, Audrey looked back at her father. She saw Earl Hall conversing with a nobleman, his expression exceptionally serious. I must do something, lest Father and the others suffer harm. Audrey thought, simultaneously changing direction and heading towards a small prayer room. The fool who does not belong to this era. Tingen, Narcissus Street. I think the newspapers have said enough. The Earl Returns is definitely a play worth seeing live. It has been performed dozens of times in Backland, with every show sold out. I believe we shouldn't miss this opportunity, Klein said, holding the newspaper and arguing with Melissa. He was about to leave and desperately hoped to leave something behind in the end. Entertainment in this world was very scarce. Klein genuinely hoped to take his brother and sister out for a good time. The trip Benson envisioned was impossible, but this play, Klein couldn't miss. Benson agreed, echoing, and the most popular supporting character in The Earl Returns is a genius mechanic. Melissa was clearly tempted. She pursed her lips, reluctantly agreed, but her eyes were brighter than before. Just as Klein was about to respond, a whisper suddenly sounded in his ear. Someone is praying to me. It wouldn't be about Kilangos, would it? Klein thought calmly. He put his right hand behind his back and said with a smile, then I will patiently wait for the ticket booking day to open. All right, I'm going back to my bedroom to prepare a report. With that, Klein hurried upstairs. In the room, Klein closed his eyes, suppressed his emotions, and only opened his eyes a few seconds later. He took 4 steps counterclockwise, arriving at Saphira Castle to respond to the prayer. Crimson stars shimmered with layers of halos. Klein reached out to touch, and the voice of Miss Justice flowed out. It really is Kilangos. Klein reached out and touched the star, beginning to respond to Audrey. In the small prayer room, Audrey finished her prayer with a restless heart. She tidied her clothes and demeanor, opened the door, and returned to the corridor. Audrey walked back along the corridor towards the dining hall. As she looked at the guests around her holding wine glasses and plates, her vision suddenly blurred, and she found gray mist filling the surroundings. She saw the figure in the gray mist, sitting casually on a bronze chair, saying, "My blessed will handle it. Praise Mr. Fool." Audrey's eyes lit up, and she silently cheered in her heart. After doing all this, Klein immediately projected Miss Justice's prayer scene into the Hanged Man's star. With the relay complete, Klein left Saphira Castle. He didn't rush to touch the spiritual wall, but softly chanted Eve's honorific name. The embodiment of disaster. The master of the mirror world. The symbol of joy and pain. Miss Justice encountered someone suspected to be Kilangos at Duke Negan's ball. He disguised himself as Baron Grimir to infiltrate the ball, his purpose unknown. As the last syllable fell, Klein ended his prayer and then leaned over his desk to write a letter to Mr. Azek, informing him of the intelligence he had received. After writing the letter, Klein took out his copper whistle, summoned the messenger, and handed him the letter. I'm truly too busy. Watching the messenger leave, Klein sighed in his heart. Backland Street. Wind Cathedral. Alger was studying the investigation reports from the past few days, trying to find clues about Kilangos. Suddenly, he found his vision becoming illusory, gray-white mist pervading the surroundings. In the depths of the mist, a high-backed chair stood, and a figure could vaguely be seen. Mr. Fool. As the thought arose, Alger saw a hazy figure in a long court dress appear in the gray mist. She maintained a praying posture, continuously recounting her discoveries. Kilangos. Alger was first startled, then joyfully pressed his left chest and said, "Praise be to you, great Mr. Fool." He lowered his head, wanting to ask the fool's blessed, but before he could speak, everything vanished without a trace, as if it had never appeared. Alger's pupils contracted slightly, once again sensing the fool's power. Backland, Sherwood Borough. A whisper sounded in Eve's ear. It was Klein. He tilted his head slightly, listening to the intelligence from Klein. After listening, a hint of understanding flashed in Eve's eyes, and he turned his gaze towards Duke Negan's ball. At this time, the performance at the ball had just begun. Although Eve did not know Baron Grimir, he still easily found Keelangos in the crowd. He watched Keelangos cut down the chandelier, using the darkness to attack Duke Negan. Keelangos was indeed a pirate general, possessing very rich combat experience. It was just a pity that his disguise was seen through by a spectator, and the prey had already prepared a trap for the hunter in the ballroom. However, the prey did not succeed in hunting the experienced hunter for much money, nor did the hunter die by the prey's hand. Eve saw the belated members of the Church of Storms, and also Mr. Hanged Man. Although the Hanged Man was trying his best to suppress it, Eve still noticed his terrible mood after discovering Keelangos. It seems Mr. Hanged Man and Keelangos have some unknown past, Eve thought silently in his heart. He stood up and left the apartment, preparing to personally witness the end of the event. After all, he had promised Zhou Mingrui, so he should at least show his face. Aided by the wind, Keelangos passed through the forest and across the river, shaking off his pursuers. Just then, he saw a woman in front of him. A cold glint flashed in Keelangos's eyes. He had originally planned to create the illusion of escaping by submerging into the Tussock River via the canal, then turning to run into Backland's economic center, the Hillsden Borough. But if this woman was here, she would inevitably see his actions, and even if he later changed his appearance, it would only add considerable danger. This woman could be used to feed the creeping hunger, so he wouldn't have to look for vagrants anymore. Recently, for some unknown reason, a group of official Beyonders had been focusing on vagrants, which had made Keelangos's actions constrained. The moment the idea formed in his mind, Keelangos urged the creeping hunger to grab the woman, and a terrifying aura immediately surged from his body. Eve looked up at Keelangos, who was rapidly approaching him, and a slight smile played on his lips. Keelangos's breathing instantly hitched when he saw the woman's face. He felt a pang of regret that such a beautiful woman was about to become food for a creeping hunger. No. The feeling of pity appeared and vanished instantly. Almost in a flash, Keelangos noticed the anomaly. This woman could actually resist the aura of the creeping hunger, a terrifying power that even Keelangos himself found startling. Keelangos immediately wanted to stop his movement, but before he could even begin, his vision suddenly blurred. He saw the various colors in the darkness become intensely vibrant, and everything seemed to be painted with oil pastels. Chapter 148, Two High Sequence Beyonders. Suddenly, a giant humanoid skeleton appeared before Keelangos. This monster was 4 meters tall, and its eye sockets glowed with pitch-black flames. A Beyander of the Corpse Collector pathway. A cold smile played on Keelangos's lips. He didn't slow down, and at the same time, the glove on his left hand emitted a pure light. He spread his arms as if embracing the sun, and a pure, scorching light descended from the sky, enveloping the giant skeleton. The painting world vibrated violently. As the light pillar dissipated, the black flames in the giant skeleton's eye sockets instantly extinguished. Immediately after, its body gradually became transparent, then crumbled inch by inch, disappearing before Keelangos. This was a Sequence 5 Priest of Light's ability from the Sun Pathway, a bane to the undead. Eve watched the giant skeleton dissipate before her, Keelangos's figure reflected in her sea-blue eyes. She raised her hand, and ethereal black flames danced on her fingers. Eve pressed 2 fingers together and swiped them across her eyes. Keelangos was about to use the Priest of Light's ability again to directly break the painting world, but suddenly, he reached out and grabbed his own neck. His hands gripped his neck tightly, and the force gradually increased. If he continued, he would choke himself to death. This is a curse. The lack of oxygen significantly slowed Keelangos's thoughts, but his excellent combat experience allowed him to quickly assess the situation. There's another demoness. Qilangos didn't know how he had been cursed. A demoness's curse required a medium, hair or blood. Even a powerful demoness needed a mirror reflecting the target's image, but Qilangos hadn't noticed any of these. However, the current situation left him no time to ponder this question. The air around Qilangos seemed to be dyed golden, as rings of illusory golden light spread outwards, bringing a warm sensation. This was a priest of light's ability, capable of purifying evil forces within the body and dispelling curses. Qilangos's face had already begun to turn purple due to severe oxygen deprivation. His mouth was wide open, desperately trying to gasp for air. The golden light rings were still spreading, little by little, and the hands tightly gripping his neck were still contracting, little by little. Why, isn't it working? Qilangos's eyes widened, staring fixedly at the woman before him. His former pity vanished without a trace, replaced by intense killing intent. The glove on his left hand changed appearance, and an aura of majesty erupted from Qilangos. He glared at the demoness, intending to use spiritual stinger to force her to lift the curse. But before he could act, the painting-like world rippled, and a bronzed-skinned man appeared beside the woman. They were not far apart, yet Qilangos couldn't see him clearly. His field of vision had begun to blacken, his thoughts were gradually blurring, and his sight was also fading. Immediately after, his blurry vision showed one white, indistinct human figure after another, with countless black flames floating in midair. In an instant, his entire vision was filled with blurry white figures and floating black flames. No, no, no. Alger gritted his teeth, rushing around City Park towards the Hilton district. He wasn't willing to give up even a sliver of hope. No need to pursue. Suddenly, the wind carried a message. No need to pursue. Alger turned his head, looking up at the trees. Archbishop Snake, wearing a black robe embroidered with the storm symbol, gazed diagonally downwards. Alger was momentarily puzzled, then immediately turned and ran at high speed towards Archbishop Snake's location. As he got closer, Alger saw that Archbishop Snake's square face was devoid of expression, and his eyes were unusually stern. Alger averted his gaze and continued running towards the forest. Suddenly, a figure with an ancient samurai topknot appeared in his sight. Qilangos. Rear Admiral, the Hurricane, Qilangos. Qilangos lay on the grass, his hands clutching his own neck, eyes bulging, face a dark purple. Alger was first stunned, then a surge of ecstasy filled his heart. Before he could react further, he suddenly saw Qilangos's body rapidly decay, festering with yellowish-green pus, and flesh falling off in chunks. Crack, crack, crack. Qilangos was reduced to mere bones, and his two empty eye sockets detached from their hollows, hitting the ground almost simultaneously. The sudden turn of events astonished the present punishers, but before they could react, Qilangos's corpse underwent another change. Qilangos's bony hands suddenly began to move, quickly tightening, gripping his own cervical spine so forcefully that Alger could hear the sound of bone cracking. It was then that Alger noticed the fracture in Qilangos's cervical spine. This terrifying scene was deeply imprinted in Alger's mind, making him wonder if he was in a bizarre nightmare. What exactly did he encounter? Did you tell anyone else about this intelligence? Was anyone else aware of this intelligence itself? Alger immediately regained his composure. He glanced at Qilangos's remains and, already prepared, explained, I reported the intelligence to you, Archbishop, as soon as I received it. In an instant, Alger snapped back to reality. Now calm, he immediately understood what Qilangos had encountered. Mr. Fool's attendant. Alger suppressed the fear in his heart and silently recited, praise the fool, hoping to appear more devout. The personnel who directly obtained the intelligence even sacrificed themselves for it, and those who handled the transfer did not open the letters. I can confirm this. However, I cannot confirm if the source of the intelligence had any leaks. If we could know, others might as well. Archbishop Snake was silent for a moment, then said to the other punishers who were arriving, Qilangos is dead. At least 2 high-sequence beyonders, or 1 high-sequence beyander used a sealed artifact of the same sequence, but that's not necessary, so the possibility is low. Similarly, dealing with one Kilangos doesn't require two high-sequence Beyonders. At this point, Archbishop Snake paused, frowning deeply, and continued, after initial observation, I believe one of them is a high-sequence Beyonder of the death pathway, and the other is a high-sequence Beyonder of the demoness pathway. Whether other high-sequence Beyonders were involved is pending. The motive is unknown. Two high-sequence Beyonders. These were demigods. He hadn't expected Mr. Fool's attendant to be a high-sequence Beyonder, and two of them at that. Only high-sequence Beyonders could kill Kilangos in such a short time, right? Alger shivered, thinking of Kilangos's bizarre death. At the same time, the same question as Archbishop Snake arose in Alger's mind. Why did Mr. Fool send two high-sequence Beyonders? Dealing with Kilangos simply didn't require two high-sequence Beyonders. For more thrilling fanfiction stories like this, check out my channel Fanfic Audiobook. Dive into epic adventures, mysterious realms, and legendary journeys brought to life through immersive storytelling. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more amazing audiobooks.